Kings for a little bit. Say happy things.
I
I
hope.
know that.
Well, it's a Canadian Thanksgiving. It's not really relevant to anybody else, but me. But I'm having a long weekend. But at the very least, I hope everyone else is having a good weekend. I guess it's Monday for you, so that doesn't apply. I don't know what I'm talking about anymore.
No, no, it's Sunday. It's Sunday for us.
Oh, is it?
We're
Oh
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
we're
right.
only
Yes, you're only 5 hours ahead.
only slightly in the future.
My brain is still waking up.
Cool. Okay, people are saying you're coming through loud and clear. Big up to Wildcat as well, because Wildcat's actually somebody who told me about both of your streams. Um, I am still able to work part-time, so I have a like British sleeping pattern, so I don't get to see you guys as much as I would like. But I very much enjoyed both of your streams and your approaches to science and the philosophy of science and misinformation and what counts as information and what counts as scientific discourse in an era where let's face it, people have gone a little bit crazy. COVID has broken some brains in terms of bringing out the chuds. But yeah, please introduce yourselves, and I will share the links to your streams as well for people. And guys, they're massive leftists as well, so you really can't ask for much better. But go ahead.
Well, I appreciate the kind words. And yeah, I'm Corey Campbell, a biochemist, and I usually cover science and research, dig into some papers, covering a range of topics, and I cover some news and some politics, kind of all over the place. Pretty much it.
Awesome. What is
Awesome.
something you have covered recently that you've enjoyed very much?
Uh,
Thank you. Welcome.
so I also take, let's say, paper requests. So people often send me papers saying they want me to cover it, and assuming I can actually do it justice, or it's a paper that's actually comprehensible to me, I will cover it. And
Mhm.
there's one paper that someone sent me that was basically about evolution, or rather in vitro evolution, and sort of like tracking evolution, arguably in real time. And I really enjoyed covering that paper. Uh, and
Whoa.
and it required me to like draw out figure, not required, but rather I drew out figures, and tried to do a really deep dive on it. It seems like, at least from the feedback that I got, people enjoyed it, and I enjoyed it.
Wait, how how did they how the fuck did they do that? I thought the kind of point, well, one of the pillars was the long-term kind of what is the specific scientific term for like the little like the difference between having like I don't know a fucking fin and a hand, right? I thought like you can't see that, and it's
Uh,
always just been like a historical theory because of fossils and stuff.
well, you can't see that in real time because obviously that's over the course of whatever
Mutants.
really long time. But it was when I say tracking evolution in real time, it was uh, tracking it at a molecular level in real time. As in this paper, they were using a very elegant, in my opinion, very elegant RNA system that had sort of a circular life cycle that they
Mhm.
designed, and they're using this RNA model because it's sort of hypothesized that RNA might be basically one of uh, origins of replicating molecules or replicating life, so to speak. Uh, and so they were able to track sort of uh, how two RNA molecules can actually compete against each other, given the environment that they put them in, and how one RNA molecule in a particular environment, like it will actually be, naturally selected, and you can actually see the mutations accumulate over time. And they're able to, the reasons why we can't, track, let's say, human evolution in real time, because, our generations are like whatever, 70, 100 years,
Mhm.
rather, the human lifespan is long, as opposed to in this system, like their generations are literally like, 10, 20 minutes. You can actually generate like hundreds or thousands of generations, much in a day. So you see mutations accumulate. in time and see
I
natural
have a
selection.
question. I have a science question. Oh my God. I'm about to piss both of you off like I did all my science teachers at school. I fucking loved science as a kid. But classic, I went to an all-girls school. I did so well. And then I went to a mixed school, almost failed. Like something about the dynamic. Clearly, I didn't feel confident enough for whatever reason, right, to be the person that wanted to do all the fun experiments and things. But my question is, so you were talking about those sorry, I haven't forgotten you, Homozygo or Homozygo. I don't quite know how to pronounce your name, sorry.
Homozygote.
But I just have a question, which is, so I read a thing about a HIV patient who had COVID, as in acute COVID. Hey Larry, welcome in. We're getting our science learn on. Most people in chat are like people that are into politics. This is going to be an education for us all. I'm kind of excited. I'm excited for this, like, breaking down academic barriers, as it were. But in this HIV patient, they didn't know that they were HIV positive, so they had a poor T cell count, so they weren't able to clear the virus, and the virus was mutating inside them. This was a patient in South Africa. What the fuck is happening there? Like, what the fuck does that mean? Is that God, I feel so stupid. Is that like evolution of a virus inside a person, or
They can, yeah, they can absolutely evolve over time if they're chronically infected. And that's the current hypothesis behind where variants came from in the first place, was a chronically infected immunocompromised person, whether it's due to HIV or some other immunocompromising illness. If they can't get rid of the virus, it will encounter an immune system that's very incomplete or almost non-existent, with just enough evolutionary pressure to select for mutations that are advantageous to evade the immune system, and more specifically antibodies in the first place, since that is the biggest thing that protects people against SARS-CoV-2 infection is antibodies. So if somebody who is immunocompromised is infected chronically, which is
yeah?
very possible, and we're talking the span of at least a year in some cases, if not longer,
This
while
patient,
being
yeah, this
contagious the
patient was a
entire
year.
time. Yeah, oh yeah, and
Crazy.
that's uncommon, or that's not uncommon rather. People who are immunocompromised and infected can absolutely be infected for over a year. I think the longest time span that I've seen has been almost 2. And
Wow.
if we're to believe one of the scientists who's looking into this issue very, very closely, in Mark Johnson, a virologist from the University of Missouri here in the States, he has seen some of these chronically infected people who are shedding their virus into the wastewater, so they can actually track these so-called cryptic lineages, or essentially variants derived from immunocompromised people. And he's been seeing some of those in the water for over 2 years. So this
Wow,
is
shit.
most definitely a thing, and has been a thing since the very first flavor of COVID emerged from China. So to go
Yeah.
back to the root of your question, yeah, the virus is likely to be evolving in that person chronically if they have HIV, especially HIV that's not being treated with antiretrovirals, right? If there's no ability to
Yeah.
clear the virus, then it's essentially going to have free mutational reign. And it would be very interesting if scientists and physicians were able to find that patient or other patients like them, for example, and isolate the virus from them, sequence it, see what mutations it's acquired and what it looks like. And sometimes those are unfortunately predictors of the other variants in the wider population that are going to be selected for. The chronically infected people seem to be the harbingers of what's to come in a lot of ways, both literally and metaphorically. So that's kind of where that situation stands, using that person as an example.
Wow, that is crazy. Okay,
It's
people
wild.
are saying, "Hey, who's this?" So would you like to introduce yourself? I've just got your
Yeah, totally.
Twitch
I'm
channel.
homozygote. My government name is Marcus, but you can find me online at least at twitch.tv/homozygote. I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate at the University of Vermont. I'm looking to graduate with the damn thing by the end of the academic year. So, fingers crossed, the data and the mice work out the way I need them to. But I spend my time on Twitch 2 days a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 8 p.m. Eastern, to essentially do what you said earlier, right? To break down academic barriers, to digest literature for folks who are curious, and ultimately, I kind of occupy a couple of different niches. I'm someone who cares a lot about mis and disinformation online, so I do
Mhm.
spend some amount of time actually kind of going over what other larger content creators say, trying to break it down, point out what's wrong, and if they're amenable, actually work with them to try and shore up these issues. But that's much easier said than done.
Hmm.
I talk a lot about the philosophy of science, since that's, I think, a
Mm.
lot of the root issues of why there's
Uh-huh.
been so much mis and disinformation and a lot of misunderstandings over the course of the pandemic, and of course, before COVID even hit in the first place.
Oh yeah. Oh
So
yeah.
the educational systems worldwide, I think, are failing a lot of people. So, and I try and essentially be glue and fill in whatever gaps I can to help people understand, how science proceeds, how scientists go about doing their experiments, how they figure out what they know, so that way people can be a lot more confident and trusting in what science actually does, since that's a big societal issue right now, to the point where, like, the American government is defunding scientific research in no short
Yeah.
order. It's happening very rapidly, unfortunately. So,
Hmm.
trying to essentially play my part to do what I
Wow.
can and help people feel more confident and trustworthy in the procession of science.
That is, I mean, wow, guys. Like, welcome them in. Thank you both. What you have said is, like I said, there are a lot of leftists here. There are a lot of people that will be coming here who themselves have experienced different form of disabilities throughout their life and have within a unknown, so long COVID at least, maybe not MECFS, but long COVID is a modern phenomenon. I've only had it for 2 years, right? Whether it actually is new or not is maybe something that we can't answer today, but it certainly looks very similar to MECFS. There is so much misinformation out there. And what I think might be a good idea, if you're both willing,
Hmm.
um, is I'm going to give a little introduction. I'm going to talk about what it's like being a patient. I'm going to talk about my onset. And then um, there are some kind of theories that I know you both have read, because I've seen it. I've seen you talking about it, but you've both read lots of literature on it. And I know there are some patients who can't be here right now, who are in like the patient groups that I'm in, who will really be like, they'll want to come back and they'll want to listen to it because they found themselves in a position which is and I'll explain this more in a second, but like long COVID really is like the worst thing I've ever experienced in my life. And I did not realize that there was like the capacity to suffer this much. And I worked in states of like abject poverty giving HIV tests. I've worked with landmines, I've done badass hard things that have pushed me to the limit. Nothing in comparison to just how sick people are. So I do want to spend just a little bit of time kind of clarifying it, because this kind of myth that we're like a little bit tired and a little bit lazy, and it's like absolutely not. Red Falcon. So MECFS is a well, hold on. Let me pause. Is that okay with you guys? And we'll kind of jump
Yeah, it's
between
totally fine.
you.
It's your show, basically.
Yeah, take the wheel.
No, it's collaborative. We're socialists here, guys. Well, I am. I mean, you can be whatever you want, but okay. So yeah, so something that's really important is because it's so new, people are really sick. They're really fucking desperate, and they're doing scary things. They're including myself. I won't talk about it because it's terms of service, and it's not something that anyone can change here. But like, people are spending lots of money with like slightly dodgy doctors and therapies, and they're traveling overseas and they're not getting better, and they're sometimes getting worse. And I see a lot of people online will do things like they'll read like, look at this paper N20. You know what I mean? A normal conventional, we took some samples and blood and did some work, and we're trying to explore a theory, scientific paper. 70% of those people had herpes, so I must have herpes. So now I'm going to go and treat herpes. And that's something I'd quite like to sort of push gently. Obviously, I can't make, none of us can make those decisions for people. But away from thinking in a very rigid, study means X, I have X. Fuck, I must do Y because someone's printed this terrible paper and it's, you can tell it's kind of self-published. And it says it will fix it. And I've been sick in bed for a year and I'm really desperate, so I'm going to go do that. And that's because that kind of thinking's really hard, right? And more than anything, the reason why people are in that situation is because doctors aren't treating them, unfortunately.
Well, I can. Sorry, go ahead if you had more to say.
No, that's perfect. Please jump in.
Well, I can totally. So obviously, I can't empathize fully with long COVID because I don't have it. But I can sympathize to a large extent with, let's say, zooming out with, let's say, the chronic illness community, because I'm pretty transparent about the fact that I have a chronic illness in the form of Crohn's disease that I've had for going on over 2 decades now. And even though there's obviously differences, I think there's also overlap. And as sort of what Homozygote alluded to in the content that they cover, I also cover, let's say, misinformation, disinformation, and try to point out where misinformation, disinformation occurs. And the phenomenon that you allude to in terms of, patients, let's say, doing their own research and trying to solve their own problems, is, yeah. So I've been sort of, even though I'm early on Twitch, I've been sort of involved in online communities for my own condition and sort of doing my attempts to correct misinformation and disinformation and let's say doing debunking, because it is a phenomenon that occurs, I think, probably in just about every chronic illness community, particularly my own. And even though it's frustrating, I can totally understand it because it is. I think it's understandably motivated by, let's say, some desperation, so to speak. As you pointed out, if they're not getting appropriate care, or if the medical establishment doesn't actually have answers for you, and that is totally a thing.
Exactly.
Where it's like, yeah, the doctors, unfortunately, they are humans, and there are definitely too many conditions that we just don't have answers to, or the answers that we do have really fall short. Where it's like, yeah, it'll, the best we can do is maybe, 20-30% of patients, we can do something for you. And the rest, you just kind of have to hope for the best, or in some cases, take matters into your own hands. And yeah, they will understandably latch on to any piece of research or information that appears promising, because, like, yeah, they want answers because they're suffering. And so I can empathize with that to a large extent, because I haven't been fully there in terms of, well, I mean, I have a long medical history. I've been hospitalized a number of times. I've had major operations, and so I understand, let's say, the extent of pain and suffering that can motivate someone to pretty much, do whatever
Yes.
they feel that can help them. And at the end of the day, what I do advocate for is, like, whatever helps you, or whatever you feel helps you, then go with that. But also just be honest about what you're doing, especially if you've exhausted your medical options, is totally a thing. The best example that I use, or let's say that's pertinent to my own condition, is like many patients with Crohn's disease manage their condition with cannabis or cannabis related products.
CBD and THC,
Yes. And the research, the actual research on that is not all that promising. If anything, whatever, at best it is mixed. It's an emerging area of research, but all of the randomized controlled trials that are high quality research pretty much points to that it is good for symptom management, but not good for actually addressing what we call objective markers of the disease, as in Crohn's disease is an inflammatory condition. There's an inflammatory process to it. You're doing damage to your GI tract and maybe other parts of your body because the inflammation is not always located or confined to the GI tract. So yes, patients consuming cannabis products, Crohn's disease patients consuming cannabis products, they will report feeling better. But when then doctors actually go in and check, objective markers, there's virtually no change at
No
all in
different.
objective markers. And there's also
Very
even some
interesting that.
research showing, I'll wrap up here, so that's why, I always would recommend consulting with your doctor if that's available to you, which I recognize that's not always available to you. But if you can't consult your doctor, I would do that because there's some evidence to show, and this is just speaking to my own condition, of like you might be making a situation worse. Because if we know that it's good for symptom management, you may be masking symptoms that basically you might be ignoring, and there's some evidence to show that consuming cannabis products may be associated with worse outcomes, because it's like, you might just be sort of putting a band-aid on something and allowing you to ignore it and not actually getting
Mm.
treatment for the underlying inflammation. As in, it would be analogous to like if you have appendicitis, okay, and you can take painkillers to address the acute pain of appendicitis, but at some point, that's probably going to burst or something other bad thing is going to happen.
That's fascinating. Yeah, one of my close friends has Crohn's as well and is being treated for it. And when I was really ill, we were like, there was a period where I was basically, to all extents and purposes, like in a waking coma for about 4 months. I don't know if you guys have seen what happened to Physics Girl.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, it's quite sad, but I do think we should watch it because I actually think it shows the like gravity of the situation with people. Because again, like the myth is people get a bit sick, get COVID, and COVID itself is like not something to fucking mess with. Yeah, okay, a lot of people are fine, but there are a lot of people who have been killed by it. Let's not forget that. And people like myself and other people who are immunocompromised, and I don't know if this is the same for you because of Crohn's medication, but these viruses then naturally are more of a risk, right?
Mhm.
Because we are simultaneously taking medicine that is trying to reduce the systems that might be in place to try and help us when we get the virus. Which is, so my example for this is the NHS here is terrible. There's generic Paxlovid. All I will say is you can find ways of getting this. You can find ways of getting it through a doctor internationally. That's what I've done. I have Paxlovid with me now. There might be a time where Paxlovid stops working, but I just had COVID about a month, 6 weeks ago. Absolutely fucked me up. Really, really bad. There was a point where I was like, shit, might have to go to hospital, and I was like, right, I will take Paxlovid and I'll try and sleep. I couldn't really move, so there was no choice. And I woke up and I was so much better, and I was like, thank fuck. So if you're in a position where you feel like, people around you aren't taking COVID seriously, you're like, people in chat are speaking about having diabetes. Diabetes is a like at-risk condition as well, both type 1 and type 2. So like, yeah, if you can find a way to protect yourself, I do think that's really important as well. Please, can you turn the music down? Yeah, sorry if it's too loud. In fact, we'll just turn it off. Let me. I don't know if you had anything to add to that.
No, pretty much. Just to, I guess, wrap up my diatribe is like I understand why patients turn to things that are potentially harmful, or like
Yes.
are trying to justify their decisions based off of arguably very poor quality research, because um,
Mm.
any answer is better than no answer, even if it's a bad answer for some
Yes,
people.
you are absolutely right. I can tell you, there's going to be a trigger warning for the next 10-minute, guys, because I'm going to talk about my experience, and it's awful. But like, I'm here and I'm fine, and I have lots of support, so don't worry about me. But if you are really sensitive to stories of, like suicide ideation and stuff, go away for 10 minutes and then come back. Like, go have a cup of tea because this is going to get real heavy. But When I've basically my long COVID onset was I funnily enough lived and worked in Southeast Asia, including a place in Cambodia that had a direct line to Wuhan that was open for like half of the fucking pandemic. Totally fine. Worked with bombs, totally fine. It's fucking ridiculous when I describe it like this. Really, really active. Had spent a lot of time in my career, like trying to get to where I was. I was really lucky. Just before the pandemic, I was offered some amazing opportunities, and I got to go, do a lot of things that I certainly don't regret doing. Working overseas, I got my dream job, which is I'm a data scientist now for an international LGBT humanitarian organization, which is lucky because I think if I had to do more human, like person-facing stuff, I'd have to have given up my job. I got COVID, stayed at home for a week, felt shit, felt really fucking sick. Like, yeah, really, really not good. And went for a run so I felt like I'd recovered, but I felt a little off. I felt like sort of like, when I don't know if any of you guys have ever had like a really heavy night of drinking and you wake up and you feel like your electrolytes are off and you just feel like weak and shaky. And I was incredibly fit. Like there was a point in my life where I was like considering joining the Navy as an officer, blah, blah, blah. Went for a run and then 24 hours later collapsed. The worst experience of my life, the most traumatic experience of my life. I remember it distinctly. I was at work and I was like, something feels strange. I stood up, collapsed, blacked out. I can't remember like the next couple of hours. Rushed to A&E because my housemates just heard like a bam as I fucking hit the floor. Then for the next 3 months, until actually, it's funny you say it, I took CBD and there's obviously something. I don't know what. I don't think the science particularly knows what, because there's not enough of it. Maybe it did have a positive effect on some inflammation that was in my body, and I became slightly better. But if we just have a look at what's happened to Physics Girl, this is really fucking like upsetting, just so you guys know. And she's obviously like kind of like a colleague of you guys, and like it's a real shame because explosive physics is what I did with landmines. It's really fun. You learn science in a really fucking fun way because if you mess it up, you'll definitely know. So it's a real shame to see what's happened. But for the first 3 months, I was kind of like this. So when you are thinking of a long COVID patient, I want you to know that if you look at me, I'm much further down the line. I'm well into this self-experimentation because I have to be. But luckily, my doctor helps me. But yeah, I want you to look at this person and kind of like that's this is the reality for a lot of people.
It's one of my best friends,
And guys, if you want to say something, like please just jump in whenever. Thanks, Wildcat, as well. I don't want people posting about Palestine right now, in all honesty. Like,
I'm back and you're what do with my hands?
hey, Buffy. Welcome in. We're talking about long COVID. We're doing a science stream with two awesome streamers. In fact, it's time to give people shout outs again. But there's Corey Campbell here, who is a. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves again, super duper quickly?
I'm just Corey Campbell. I'm a biochemist. I cover science research news.
I'm homozygote. I'm a neuroscientist, more or less the same science research, news, philosophy.
Bam! We're watching a video that is about physics girl who also has long COVID, and we're watching it to kind of understand the gravity of what we're talking about. Fucking hell. And what you were saying earlier, Corey, the worst thing in this situation is not knowing that you're going to get better, not having an answer. It is horrifying.
Yeah, I totally empathize that scenario.
And barely move. And the past week, she has twice. Diana has long COVID, and that has triggered something called PFS. It's a chronic fatigue syndrome that is extremely debilitating. And Kyle, her husband, has been a full-time caretaker, and helps as much as she can, but her condition keeps her limited from seeing any other friends or family right now because it's too exhausting for her. So lately, the way her other friends and I have been staying in touch with her is that we send updates about our day to her husband Kyle, and then because she hasn't been well enough to read text messages by herself. So yeah, it's bad. And it looks like the road to recovery is going to be way longer than any of us ever expected. And we have all just been scrambling to find ways to help in this kind of impossible situation. And I know that there are a lot of you who have followed her for a long time and who have been looking for ways to help too. And Diana has a Patreon page. And I also know that when I went through health problems of my own, Patreon was the only thing that kept me afloat during that time. Levi, who is her editor and videographer, is still posting some stuff on there, including some health updates. And I just want to clarify that this is not something that Diana has asked me to do. Like, I've talked to her friends and family about it, and honestly, I'm excited for a time where she's well enough to maybe be upset with me for posting this. I'm just trying to help a friend, and Patreon is something that I know helped me a tremendous amount. So if you've been looking for a way to help, I think
I'll tell you one sec, Buffy. We'll go.
now she just getting better. She hopefully is on COVID specialist clinic soon, and they're constantly developing new treatment methods. So we're all being very hopeful. That's the update. Happy
Okay. Yeah. You basically are like the living dead. So MECFS is a gosh, the history of post-viral diseases is quite complex and quite nuanced. So I don't think I'd do it justice right now. But it's very likely that long COVID, at least a substantial part of it, is a disease called can either of you say it?
Myalgic encephalomyelitis.
Boom, 10 out of 10.
I've said it a
Perfect.
lot.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's I just call it MECFS because, you know, I'm not so up on my like Latin and Greek like words that are basically a sentence. But the main point is no one knows what it is. Post-virus things have been known for a while to be a thing. Like think about polio, right? Post-polio disease is quite well known because of the really bad effects it has on people. There's stuff like post-Ebola as well, but it's different. For a long time, people like the odd person would get sick with a virus. 99% of people recover, and then 1%, this awful, mysterious disease happens to them. It has historically been completely disregarded as essentially, there's no other way of calling it, but hysteria, because it's predominantly a women's issue. Although we will be discussing this today in terms of long COVID, there still isn't a biomarker, and there might not be a biomarker for long COVID where, if you're treating someone with MS, you can use MRIs and other kind of apparatus. Kind of like you said, Corey, like if you have certain diseases, doctors will be just totally kind of coded into, this is the disease, this is what it looks like, these are the markers that I need to look for. My disease treatment should be trying to make those markers look better, at a very simple level.
Yep.
Yeah. And like obviously there's a holistic element of being a patient as well, which is like my friend has rheumatoid arthritis. She is a 45-year-old woman. She's mum. She's getting baked all the time now. She fucking loves it. And it makes me really happy because she also has conventional care. Her doctors are like, whatever. She's like, I've been miserable and sad for a long time, and my doctors are going to monitor it, kind of like you said, Corey, to make sure it doesn't hurt. It's not like, whoa, hold on, you're masking, and like you're actually like, you've got loads of antibodies and you're in loads of trouble or something. It's not that. But yeah, we don't have that for ME. We also don't have it for long COVID, which is going to be a big topic of. That's why we got the big brains here, because people are left like Physics Girl, and their families and people that care about them are like, holy fucking shit, how can a virus do this to someone? They can't work, they can't look after themselves. My parents had to look after me for a year. And lots of chronic illnesses are difficult to diagnose. Yeah, exactly. And there are extra hurdles. I genuinely believe, because I am masculine presenting and because of my background that I've seen my doctor with, hey doctor, can you give me a med check because I'm basically going out to dig up bombs? And they're like, cool, yeah, blah blah blah. Because I have this relationship with him, I think he treats me very differently than a lot of women experience in the doctor's room. And I know a lot of women feel incredibly dismissed and not listened to. Okay, before I go off on a million diatribes, I think it would be awesome if either one of you started sort of discussing some of the science. So the too long didn't read, guys, is this is a very, very shit disease. You become sensitive to light. You get post-exertional malaise, which for me was this 24-hour thing. You did something, you felt fine until 24 hours, then I'd collapse again, and that cycle repeats to this day, actually. It's just got a bit better. And you go to the doctors and they call you mad, or, you need to exercise. And exercise actually for this is probably some of the worst stuff you can do. It might be really good for something like MS, but for long COVID, it's really bad, really, really bad. But in the pursuit of trying to demystify what long COVID is and potentially ME/CFS, I personally think they are essentially the same thing. But yeah, I hand it over to either one of you to sort of begin discussing what some of the literature says about long COVID.
Yeah, I'll start off a bit, although as maybe disclaimer. Well, since I have a fellow scientist here, if anything I say is inaccurate, by all means, feel free to jump in and correct me. And also, if anything that I
Yeah,
say
yeah, no worries.
is unclear, also feel free to interject and ask me to hopefully clarify things better or make things more comprehensible. But sort of as far as I know, okay, in terms of speaking specifically, I guess starting off with like long COVID, sort of to your point that you brought up. So, uh, yeah, long COVID, obviously, still pretty much in its infancy in terms of trying to understand it. Whether it's actually fully 100% the same as
Mm-hmm.
MECFS, I think that might be disputable. There seems to be, I think, a large overlap in terms of based off of the data that I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like maybe like 40 to 60% of long COVID patients basically meet the sort of some of the criteria to diagnose MECFS. But there's no, as far as I can tell, let's say there's multiple criteria to use when it comes to diagnosing MECFS,
Mm-hmm.
but there are some like more common ones and less common ones. I think CDC has its own particular definition, and then there's like
I think the CCC is probably the best criteria that. Well, I mean, it's the most comprehensive, but there are others as well. I think like there's the Oxford Fatigue Scale or something like that. But...
exactly. But I think at the end of the day, using maybe one of the more common ones and maybe exposing my bias, there's a Canadian criteria, and so
We've got a nationalist here, guys.
so definitely there appears to be a significant portion of long COVID patients that meet that criteria. And I think, as far as I can tell, we're really still trying to like fully tease out like what long COVID is and like its pathogenesis, where and I guess it's probably just safe to say that it's probably just not one specific thing, and it's like a manifestation, or rather how it manifests in each patient is probably going to be unique. Where there's maybe some research to show that maybe for some patients with long COVID, it may just be a matter of insufficient viral clearance. Of like these patients, there's some sort of viral reservoir or antigens lying around that for whatever reason their body can't clear it for some specific subset of patients. Whereas for other ones, it seems like infection, either mild or acute or mild or severe, seems to potentially induce immunological changes that may sort of be a trigger for some level of autoimmunity. But basically, a lot of it is gray. But I think in terms of hopefully generating hope, I think we are slowly narrowing down some biomarkers. I think there was research published fairly recently, I think just like in the past few weeks or month or so, of like actual biomarkers that we might be able to track.
Are you referring to the Nature article?
I believe it was published in a preprint in Nature, where I think they sort of narrowed down, like it seems like cortisol levels, and I think T cell reactivity appears to correlate very strongly, or like with high I think like greater than 95% accuracy in terms of being able to, I guess, quote unquote, diagnose long COVID. That's my broad, I guess, zoomed out view. But if homozygote wants to probably fill in details, then I can. They can go for it.
I'm gonna just try and find that. I want to call you homo, but I feel like so offensive, even though I'm a massive gay. Like
No, you
I'm called
can't. You
lesbian
can't.
also.
That's the inside joke
Hey,
I have on the
homo.
platform is like if I can like get people to call me that, then I know like they're kind of down. If they're like really hesitant about doing that, then it's like okay, maybe not quite my vibe, but like it's kind of funny to like watch like bigger streamers squirm if I ever like raid them. Like, hey, like they always like pause
I love
and
it. Oh
hesitate.
my god.
So it's really funny just to watch that happen.
We've
But
taken the same approach, the same chaotic
Exactly.
Here's who we are. Fuck you.
Yeah. I mean, literally, it kind of feels like we live in perpetual chaos. So embrace it to some extent.
Very
But
true. Very true.
COVID seems to be chaos on a molecular level, since it
Mhm.
seems to be able to do all sorts of wild and wonky things that we really haven't been able to get a good scientific appraisal of over the past couple of
Mm,
years. And Corey, I think, did well to mention the paper from Akiko Iwasaki, who
mhm.
is one of the leading research authorities on long COVID, who essentially had that paper sitting in peer review for like the better part of a year. So essentially, we've been just like waiting for I don't know what to transpire for that to be published with very minimal changes at that. But the idea that like we have a biomarker, I think what we might come to find out, because this seems to be a very complex post-viral condition, is
Mm.
that biomarker may capture some, but not all, of people who have long COVID. I think if you don't have the singular biomarker in terms of high cortisol levels, or low cortisol levels rather, because that's what they found.
Yeah.
That doesn't
Some
necessarily mean
things
you
make
don't
your
have it.
cortisol be used constantly, right? That's the implication anyway. But like you said, that won't be 100% of all their long COVID patients had that.
Right. And at least in the paper, they clocked it at 94% of the people they
Okay, yeah.
sampled. So, I mean, that implies there is still a small fraction of those who don't have low cortisol that ostensibly also have long COVID. But,
Mhm, mhm.
if you're to try to scale that up to the entire population of people who have long COVID, it could very well be that, yeah, maybe most of them, a statistical majority of them have low cortisol, but there might be a sizable fraction that don't. So I think that's just maybe
Mm,
a word of caution as we all kind of proceed in light of these findings. I think there's a very big hurdle to even get people to implement a cortisol blood test, which is very simple, cheap, easy to do. Just in terms of the clinical aspect of it, right? It's a very uphill battle to get a doctor to even like wear a mask these days, which is kind of mind-boggling. So, trying to get them to actually like take long COVID seriously seems to be more of an ask for some clinicians, especially if you're to believe what some of those clinicians say on social media these days. So I think it's good. Like the
yeah.
research is unequivocally good, but there are more, I think, social hurdles in the way than anything else as far as the implementation of that research goes, to actually
Mm,
start getting the most formal appraisal possible of like, okay, how many people truly have long COVID based on this one biomarker, and then how many other people report long COVID symptoms without this biomarker, and what makes those two
what does
groups
it
different.
mean? Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
So there's
Um,
there's so much to unravel still, and the paper gives, I think, a really good direction to head towards. The research is very well done. The methods are excellent, and Akiko Iwasaki is, again, one of the premier authorities. She's opening a long COVID clinic as part of Yale, so there's a new
I think
uh, clinic opening
Petrino
there.
is he's the oh, what do you call it when you have like a specific term for somebody that does like rehabilitation? I've forgotten it, but he heads the like rehabilitation team. And I
Yeah,
know that
he's a
he's
more
really,
like
really good.
functional rehab guy, and
Yeah,
I know
yeah,
he also is
exactly, right.
opening like a separate long COVID clinic where he is, which it actually escapes my mind right now. It's also in the Northeast. I want to say New York. I want to say at Mount
Mm,
Sinai specifically, but yeah, David Putrino is a collaborator with Akiko Iwasaki. They often work together, so it's kind of nice having the research end with her, and then the more like functional rehabilitation component with Putrino. It's a very good combination of people working on this issue. So happy that we at
Mm.
least have those two folks in the collective corner of doing something about the problem. But I
I have
think,
some
go ahead.
questions I think that might be really because this is such a big paper.
Yeah,
Um, I have read it. I read it a year ago when it was first published. In what do you call it when they? It's not been peer reviewed. It's still actually I
a
Preprint.
think
preprint.
yeah preprint. There you go. There are some methods within it that I'm like, what the fuck did they do? Particularly when they are looking at different like aspects of cells. So, okay, And by that specifically, I mean the immune system cells, both innate and adaptive, right?
Mhm.
What I think is most likely, and this kind of shows how fucking desperate it's been for people. Why is this paper so important? Because it's scientists saying, yeah, no, there's something here, guys. This isn't in people's heads. Because 9 times, I'm really lucky. I went to my doctor, and my doctor was like, I think people sometimes get like autoimmune diseases from viruses, and I think you've probably got that. I was so fucking lucky. Like, and he was like, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do, which is true. And most people are told you're depressed, you're anxious, you're making it up, without even like asking how somebody psychologically feels at that moment. Although it is usually they feel fucking terrible because they're really sick, right? This is not to downplay. I've had my own mental health struggles. There will always and should always be time for like medicine and a holistic approach, where like your streams, Corey, on the old magic mushrooms, which I may or may not have partaken in myself for therapeutic properties, right?
Understandable.
Yeah, exactly. But I also like kind of similar to that paper that you were studying the other day. I went through therapy when I did it. So yeah, get good people, good professionals who help you do cool things. It can really help because you can go from being depressed to a kick-ass bitch who fucking like wins awards at university and climbs mountains. So I do know that that's a problem. That's not what I'm saying, but I'm like, yeah, the flu can trigger chronic illness. Exactly, Buffy. Someone in chat earlier said that they had type 1 diabetes and someone was telling them to eat more like peas or something fucking stupid. My mum who's Norwegian, got like one of the MMR, like measles or mumps, I can't remember, just some virus when she was about 25. She's just walking around being Norwegian, like, she's a woman, like doing her thing, blah blah blah. 2 weeks after having this virus, collapses. Similar story, hey? And she goes to the hospital, and I kid you not, the doctor was like, sorry, I shouldn't laugh. Talking to her about like whether she wants to get married and stuff. Anyway, my mum had to push for blood sugar tests, and then they were like, "Oh yeah, you got type 1 diabetes." Like she would have died, guys. She would have fucking left that hospital and died if she hadn't had insulin soon after that. Like that is how poor sometimes like medical care can be. Now, a lot of doctors do try, but my thinking behind this long COVID paper is lots of doctors are like, it's not a thing that I know about, so I don't know. Nature, a lot of people read it. There's visibility, there's notoriety behind this, right? So I think they're like, yes, something's here, and they're like, this is them showing it's some kind of inflammatory-esque post-viral syndrome. I don't know if I'm just like incredibly cynical, but I don't know what you guys think about that.
Well, I think at least for me, there's multiple things to touch upon. We're sort of expanding on your point, sort of drawing upon my own patient experience over 20 years, where yeah, the one thing that I've learned, much easier said than done, and some people are sometimes not in the position to do that, but you really have to, as a patient, like advocate for yourself. Where yeah, if one doctor's not cutting it for you, if you have the option,
Mm,
seek out as many as many legitimate medical professionals that you can. Again, if
mhm,
you're in a position to. But also again, easier said than done. Where if you're if you're potentially a patient that has ME/CFS, I understand that you don't have it. Advocating for yourself takes energy. It is exhausting.
mhm,
Um, and yeah, being dismissed by, let's say, medical professionals, I think it's unfortunately all too common, or even going by my own patient experience of like, I was diagnosed at a young age, pretty much, early teenage, late um, child years, around like 11, 12. And like, yeah, I was initially brushed off. Like my initial symptoms were just like exhaustion. largely driven by me not eating
Mm.
anymore. Because like yeah, eating was associated with just more pain and suffering. Um, and so
Fuck.
I essentially, obviously lost energy. Uh, and at some point, yeah, my mom specifically was like, okay, well, there's clearly something wrong here. But yeah, the
Mm.
doctors are like, well, see, given the fact that I'm young, that is pretty much like the operating assumption of most medical professionals. Like, if you're young,
Yeah.
there's unlikely to be something really seriously wrong with you. And so it was just thought that, whatever, I was just like being lazy, or I was looking for an excuse to get out of school, even
Mm.
though I was like a top performing student. Um, they really took pretty much, uh, fortunately, my mother at that time was a strong advocate for me because she was a nurse. And I guess had a whatever quote unquote mother's instinct of like, yeah, something's not right. I'm like, yeah, I was fortunate that my mother at the time was like a strong advocate for me of like pushing for tests. This is like not just a stomach ache or like there's something actually wrong with me. And like yeah, it took like at least 8 months to a year. Like oh, when we actually go in and look, through colonoscopy, yeah, my GI tract, parts of my intestine are like really damaged. Uh,
Fuck.
and so yeah, easier said than done. But like yeah, if you can, you really have to kind of advocate for yourself, and arguably be sort
It's
of
sad, but you also need someone to fight your corner, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
especially if you're someone that's really sick, you need someone there that is listened to. And I am, yeah, I'm not in any way diminishing your experiences because that's bullshit. But to add on that, like I can imagine again, like yeah, a lot of people who are like look and appear as women on top of that. I wonder what it is that makes doctors say you are young, therefore you must be healthy, because these people look at diseases all day, right? No?
well, so as
So
frustrating as it is, I understand it, given they're playing the odds at the end of the day.
okay, yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and they're also, well, at least given the Canadian healthcare system, they're the gatekeepers of medical resource. And
Mm.
so they don't they don't want to do any unnecessary tests. And there is a legitimate question in terms of like, do you expose this young person, X-rays and scans, et cetera, et cetera. And
On the
so
psychology of being tested for something serious
yeah,
and all of that.
so
Yeah.
there's a delicate needle to thread, and so I understand it. And as frustrating as it was for me, and for sure my mother back then, like yeah. But I've also learned as I became an adult. It's like yeah, you really have to advocate for yourself, and it's like yeah,
Mm.
it takes energy, both advocating for yourself, dealing with insurance, et cetera, et cetera. It's like it's understandable that the system will beat you down if you let it. And I understand that people can be beat down by the system, where it's like yeah, everywhere that you turn to, you're just not being taken seriously or being. I wish I had answers for these people, or better answers for these
Mm.
people, other than like yeah, if uh, continue to fight, do or have people fight for it.
So, sorry, I'm trying to find the Nature paper because I know for a while it was open access, but now it's not. It's paywall. Do either of you perchance
Uh,
have?
I believe it's still available as a preprint. Um,
Wait,
I should
maybe I have
The
it.
Iwasaki paper.
Got it.
Right.
So, what would be awesome is if we just go super simply over kind of because, like you said, homo. um,
Fun.
like or goat. Can I call you goat? That's pretty cool.
Yeah, if you want.
Okay, goat. Like this is quite an important paper. It also might be the kind of paper that like people who are feeling shit who need referral to a long COVID specialist service could take to a doctor's. Maybe. I don't know. That would be very individual. But because patients and like forums for patients are super focused on trying to understand what's going on in these papers and what it means for them, I was wondering if you were able to bring it down to like super duper 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 basic human level, like trying to explain some of the key claims, and then I have a very specific question about their autoantibody claim, but maybe we can move on to that because that's a little bit more complex. It might take a few more steps to get there, if that makes sense. But is that okay?
Yeah, that works for me. I will see, since I just spoke for a long diatribe, I'll gladly see the forward to homozygote, and they also probably have the paper more fresh in the brain than I.
Cool. Yeah, maybe the more autoimmune stuff as well.
Yeah, so can go ahead and I guess start with some of the key claims from that paper. The first one I think we already mentioned in pretty concrete terms. The idea that there's a biomarker or some measurable component of your body, in your blood or somewhere else that can be sampled and measured to determine whether or not something is wrong or not. So that was one of the biggest things, is the decline in what is called cortisol, which is the body's stress hormone, and it being lower than it should be in compared to the healthy range of what you would expect it to be. That would suggest there's some sort of dysfunction with the endocrine system, or our body's hormone system. In particular, there's two parts of our brain and the adrenal glands that all work together to essentially maintain our body's level of cortisol. So if it's lower than expected, there's some sort of strange dysfunction going on there, and that's something that is, I think, new and not really explored all that well. But I think that's the first rabbit hole opened up by this paper, is people could really jump into what might be going wrong with hormones, specifically cortisol. Now, I think what's on a lot of other people's brains is the immune system stuff in that paper. So they asked the question of, are there any disturbances in the immune system after having COVID in people who have long COVID, right? What does the immune system kind of look like when you compare people who haven't had COVID versus people who got it and recovered without long COVID, and people who got it and then got long COVID afterwards? So when they compared these three groups, looking at different sort of aspects of the immune system, one of the first things they were looking at were sort of the levels of all of the different players in the immune system, right? There's many different white blood cells that comprise the immune system. There are many different types, and each of these types and subtypes of those types all play very distinct and significant roles in sort of keeping us healthy and keeping our immune system functional. So they were looking to see, are we missing certain kinds of cells? Are there anything that's high and out of control? What's the deal, right? They're very much approaching this with a blank slate, just trying to see what does the landscape even look like. And what they found were two different cells in the immune system were increased in people who have long COVID. One of those cells is called the B cell. That's the cell that makes the protein molecule fighters called antibodies. So
I do like the B cell. It saved my life, but I feel like I'm learning to hate the B cell. That's what all this information is telling me. Sorry, go on.
yeah, no, you're fine. Any cell in the immune system almost can have a double-edged sword type of effect, depending on the context and what else going on. So someone could very much appreciate the B cell, but other people who might have an autoimmune issue that is mediated by antibodies might not appreciate it as much. Totally fair. What this paper found was an increase in activated B cells. And when they're activated, that means they're actively trying to produce antibodies. And to go along with that finding, they actually found an increased amount of what are called exhausted T cells. So T cells are a fighter in the immune system. They hunt down cancer cells. They hunt down cells that are infected by viruses and try to destroy them before they can produce more virus, or in the case of cancer, grow more tumor. So if you find a T cell and it's exhausted, it kind of means what it says it means, right? The T cell itself is tired. It means it's been fighting something for a very long time, and it's kind of lost its ability to do exactly that, fight off whatever, because it's been over a long period of time, very stimulated. It's essentially not had a chance to rest and kind of recover. So if you put these two things together, you have B cells that are high in number that are activated trying to make antibodies to fight something, and you have T cells that are tired because they've been trying to fight something for a very long time. Both of those things kind of add up to this picture that maybe the virus is still hanging out in the body, right? That goes back to what Corey said earlier about this idea of a reservoir of virus, right? If there's a reservoir of virus that's kind of hanging around, it never really left, then it might chronically stimulate the immune system, create inflammation, and essentially make these two immune cells, the B cell and the T cell, chronically active and on, always trying to fight something that it really can't quite find or get rid of. And those things can help manifest some of the symptoms of long COVID. Not all, but some. So there seems to be the most evidence for like this being the subtype of long COVID with the most people in it. So there are lots of papers that have documented persistent virus in all sorts of wild and wacky places in the body. There's the GI tract, there's respiratory tissue, which makes sense. There's taste buds, there's testicles, there's all sorts of different wild places where virus has been documented to persist. And what I tell people is, a virus like this, it came from nature, and it spent many, many years forming reservoirs in animals. Humans really aren't any different. It was kind of naive of science and medicine to think that we were, because we see now this giant pile of evidence showing the immune system for a lot of people who have long COVIDs being chronically stimulated and tired out by what seems to be persistent virus that formed a reservoir in the human body. And this virus, its skill set essentially on a molecular level, is very well adapted to hide from immune systems and to form reservoirs. So, these two things put together, I think it makes a lot of sense. And that's why this paper is really so groundbreaking, I think, is because it ties this notion together of like, there is something physically in the body going wrong. This is not something that people are making up. There is documented proof that people who have long COVID have these things going on with their immune system. They have low cortisol. You put these two things together. The virus caused all of these things to go wrong. This isn't something people can just think about and tire out their immune system because their vibes were right that day. That's kind of a ridiculous notion
that's
that
the
doctors
fucking
believe
NHS
sometimes.
approach to healthcare, though. Like, literally,
Yeah.
have you thought your way out of being sick? And unfortunately,
Yeah. Have you pulled those bootstraps harder? Try that.
Yeah, I mean, you guys here know my history. Like, you can't tell a bitch who's worked 14 hours digging bombs out of the ground. Do you know what hard work is? I'm pretty happy saying yes, I do. And I want to do that shit again, right? And like, gosh, there's so much here that you've said that's so interesting, because you've basically summarized the main, at least I think, there within this paper, what we know biologically to a certain extent, which isn't, do we have an answer? It's, what are the indications of what this could be? And for me, I think that there will be a distinction and an overlap, and some of the specialists from like Germany and other places have said this, of probably a combination of things, but I've got some questions for you as well, which is either some kind of latent virus hanging out in tissues. So somebody's asked a question about the testicles as well. Now, I have a friend who's a long COVID patient who has quite bad like sexual dysfunction since as a part of his long COVID. Do you know if that, I've not read any of this, but do you know if any of the papers that looked at those viral reservoirs also were mapped onto like some had at least a correlative relationship with patients who had some kind of sexual dysfunction, or was it just random patient samples?
So I mean that's a good question. I think there's two things that haven't really sort of been decoupled from each other, because COVID itself does have a lot of negative impact on vascular tissue, and if we're talking about at least with male bodies, if we're talking about erectile dysfunction as an aspect of sexual dysfunction, there are plenty of men who do report erectile dysfunction post-COVID as a manifestation of long COVID.
Okay.
And part of the speculation there is that maybe blood vessels to the penis were actually damaged by the virus. But you could also look towards other research. I think there's a group at the University of Miami that's been working on this for a while. And they've noticed that in some men, there are persistent reservoirs that have been documented in the testicles after biopsies have been done. And usually that skews towards more severe cases or people who got it while unvaccinated, whether it was because they chose not to get the vaccine or because the vaccine wasn't available at the time. It kind of just depends on the person, but it seems testicular reservoirs skew towards case severity and lack of vaccine availability or refusal to get it, depending. But with that being said, if we're talking about testicular reservoirs, I think that's less related to a more like a sexual dysfunction manifestation of long COVID. It has the potential to contribute, I'm sure. But I think what is more related is fertility, right? The idea that, of course, sperm are produced in the testicles, and research has definitely shown that there are decreases in sperm functionality and parameters for people who have long COVID. And with the research in question, they did have detectable amounts of persistent virus in the testicles. So it could very well be that the virus in some capacity has absolutely damaged the testicles if it's allowed to get in there. And to complicate that even more, the testicles are what are referred to as an immune privileged site, meaning in normal conditions, the immune system is not actually allowed to physically enter the testicles to fight anything off unless the situation gets rather dire. This is an evolutionary thing to prevent the immune system from accidentally destroying sperm to prevent people from passing along their genes. So,
Whoa, that's crazy.
yeah, it's
Straight
wild.
up, dude, the immune system when sorry. Thank you, Nikki. Welcome, Raiders. We are sat here. As you guys know, I'm someone that suffered from long COVID for 2 years. We're here with two mega big brains, Corey and Homo.
It's
and the
every
gun.
time. It's fun.
And we'll do shout outs for them, and you guys can give them a follow. Someone asked about male fertility. Nautical, what's up, dude? Welcome in. Someone asked about, I'm going to try and find this paper because understandably, I think people are like, whoa, there might be a viral reservoir in testicles. People are kind of, a little bit like, oh shit, I kind of want to read into that. That's immediately why I asked you, like, hold up, are these people like people that have symptoms? I don't want people to like watch this and immediately freak out. Because that's sort of why we started with this stuff. A lot of people listen to studies and
Of
the
course.
study's like, oh, some people have this, and they go, shit, have I got this? And that's not what we're trying to do here today, guys. So sorry, didn't mean to worry you. I'm gonna try and look for, you said it was the University of Miami.
So there's one group at University of Miami. I can dig up some of the papers for you.
Yeah.
If you give me a second, because I usually kind of have these on hand to. I almost say it as a joke to be like, hey dudes, COVID dick is real, COVID balls is real. Maybe you should be a little bit more careful. But I usually link to the actual pictures to show people that yep, they found virus here, and you can see the electron microscope pictures.
Ooh. Yeah, hold on.
So yeah, let me find.
It's come up straight away. I mean, you can kind of understand why there would immediately sort of be coverage of this. Unfortunately, because it is a bit scary, but I don't want
of course.
Guys to leave and be like, holy shit, this means that I'm gonna have my ability to reproduce. COVID is stored in the balls. I'm gonna hand that over to you, Go, because I do not believe that that's what this study is saying. I think the point...
that's a meme.
Okay, right, yeah. Okay, good. Sorry, as someone without balls, I have not covered this myself. Is it stored in ovaries as well? I don't know. Is it more prevalent in the vaccinated? That's a good question. It might be a study. If it was 2020, this would be pre vaccine, right? So this would
Right.
be
Yeah, this
before,
study was
this would be
published January 2021. So
yeah.
having a vaccine will absolutely reduce the odds of something like this happening. The more vaccinated you are, the less likely this is, for sure.
Okay, yeah. Right. So sorry, back to the super duper interesting Nature paper stuff.
Hmm.
My gosh, there's so much. COVID is stored in the balls where you're staying clear of those. That is true. I am staying clear of the balls, but because I'm so sick, I'm also staying clear of like any interaction with any woman that wants to be near me, which is sad, and I would like that. But okay. So, hi. I used to be someone who helped deliver HIV tests in rural South Africa. I worked with key populations, which means people who are sex workers, people who are high at risk, right? Because they do an activity, for want of a better word, that is more linked to in infection rates, right? My balls gave my girlfriend long COVID. Shut up. Turbo jerky. So HIV patients, right? I learned about T-cell stuff because I was never a clinician, but I'd be the people that, got people to the clinic if they tested positive. And then you kind of have to have quite an intense conversation with someone who you just met and you've convinced to take a HIV test, come like you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. Here's the like basic stuff. Here's basically what happens in HIV. It infects a section of cells in your adaptive immune system. They're called T cells. These go down, you are more likely to get sick. If they go down so much, you're going to get AIDS, very likely, and you're going to get loads of other infections, and then you might get really sick. I did it in an era where it's like, but don't worry, here's PrEP or PEP and ART, and we've got $1 a day medication. You're going to be completely fine. But there's been some papers, and you mentioned the term exhausted T cells. Now, this is a term that is also used in HIV, as in it's used kind of colloquially, your T cells are fucked, mate. You need to get on your HIV medication to get better. Now, I know that you know that that's not what's happening with COVID. Can
Yes.
you explain like why is it somebody who's like stupid like me and doesn't really understand science beyond if someone was like your T cells are bad, I'd go fuck, my T cells are bad, shit, I need to be on antivirals right now because I'm gonna die, because that's all I know from HIV and when I Google online, right? Can you please teach us why that's not true?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know this premise has made it into a lot of COVID cautious communities. In particular, there's one scientist on Twitter who's more or less spread this in a very conspiratorial fashion. So a lot of the, I guess, quote unquote, more establishment scientists and the institutions have firmly pushed back on this, and almost to the point where like they've gone too far and they think all COVID cautious people think this, which is nowhere near true.
Yeah.
So
Also, I did. Sorry, like
Go ahead.
as being working with some like people who've had community members die of AIDS, my life has been ruined by COVID. HIV is a very different virus. Like, it's not. I think this term airborne AIDS is like really quite a disgusting thing, and
Yeah,
I don't
it's
think
very
anyone who
harmful.
calls himself a scientist should say something like that. You know what I mean?
Agreed.
Like,
Yeah. So, and this is what I say is like if we are to advocate for like taking COVID seriously and being COVID safe, we need to do so from a basis of being factually correct, and saying COVID is airborne AIDS is very much the opposite of correct. It's a very, I think, disrespectful comparison to in a social context, because like you said, there are plenty of people that we all know who either live with HIV or have developed AIDS and then passed. So we
Yeah.
want to try and at least honor those people and be respectful of people living with HIV, to not diminish or demean what they go through by making these weird unfounded comparisons between COVID and HIV. I in the minds of most people, I kind of understand why there's a predisposition to compare COVID to HIV, because HIV in like sort of the public consciousness is a virus that causes immune system issues, and there's not really
Scary.
much education beyond that. So people hear about COVID possibly causing immune system issues, and there's sort of a knee-jerk instinct to try and think of it that way. And I think the one scientist in particular that I'm mentioning, who I won't give anybody his name because I don't want anybody finding who he is, that person in particular, I think, exploited that in a way to like clout chase on social media and build up almost like a cult-like following on Twitter. So to get back to the actual science, of course, as you mentioned, these are two different viruses, and HIV itself directly infects T cells and forms reservoirs in those T cells. And without treating HIV with antiretroviral medication, essentially over time, HIV will run through those T cells and deplete them and drain them. So when people go, get blood testing for HIV, they're having their T cell count measured to see how many do they still have left. And with SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, in severe cases, the virus can infect T cells, but in the vast majority of people, that infection is unproductive if it even gets that far, meaning you don't get death of T cells and you don't get the virus traveling to lymph nodes and stuff like that to directly infect the immune system and persist in it like HIV does. So that's the first different right off the bat, is that the virus that causes COVID really has a difficult time infecting the immune system. It's technically possible, but it's very unlikely, especially again people who are vaccinated, that's going to happen and manifest anything even remotely close to what HIV does. And then if we want to compare that paper we just talked about, the Kiko Iwasaki paper, what that showed was actually an increase in T cells of a certain variety, right? The exhausted variety. So what is helpful about that study is that it actually shows there is no decrease in T cells at all. So that finding replicates two other studies, one from the NIH, and one was actually published recently too from a group that was simply looking at T cell response kinetics when an infection happens, right, between people who are vaxxed and unvaxxed. How quickly do T cells respond to fight off the virus? Which makes sense. If you're vaxxed, they're going to respond quicker and get rid of the virus faster. At least that's the hope. But that paper also, buried in the supplemental figures, buried in a PDF, they had a very helpful graph where it showed every single kind of T cell and subtype of T cell you could possibly look at. There were no deficiencies in people who had long COVID, just across the board. There were zero deficiencies. So when people say COVID is airborne AIDS, what that implies is that people who get COVID are going to lose their T cells, and now they're going to be vulnerable to all
getting
sorts of
sick.
rare infections and cancer. And we don't see any T cell deficiency at all with 3 studies of repute that have good sample sizes between them. And we don't see in mass people who are vaccinated having these rare infections and cancers pop up. You do see a crumb of people who have rare infections in those who were infected before vaccines were available. And that correlates with the idea that because it was a brand new virus at the time, some of these things can manifest in some of those people. But it's also important to know those people do not represent everybody of among those who got infected before vaccines were available. Those people are a very small fraction of who got infected before they could get vaccinated.
Can I
So
ask a question on that?
Yeah.
Just out of interest. Is
Totally.
it because, so, from my understanding, and remember, me no do the science, really. Me do the talkie to the people with the sickness, and then I take them to the doctors, right?
Right,
And then the
right.
doctors do the science. But from my limited understanding, what is different about HIV is it uses some kind of enzyme or something. Once it's within a particular class of T cells, it hijacks those cells so that it, like you say, it essentially like lives within those sets of cells and uses like whatever it is inside the cell to stay there and live there. Now, the normal, I was just thinking ACE2 is what most people will know when we're talking about COVID as essentially the receptor entry point that the virus uses to infect a cell, right? Is it the difference? Because like T cells presumably will have ACE2 receptors on them, like on ACE2 everywhere, like all over the body, which is why initially people were very fucking worried about COVID viruses. And obviously it has killed people, so there's a reason to be worried about these things. But is it because when the virus essentially, for want of a better term, gets inside T cells, it doesn't do what the HIV virus then does, which is hijacks it and then it lives in until you. I know that there are some people who can somehow, because of some genetic stuff, like of actually be exposed to HIV and not get it, but I never fully understood why. I just got told we don't really talk about that because you need to test everyone and treat it, right? Because you can't test who will the few percentage of people who will actually be okay with the HIV virus, because it's not many people and it's not worth confusing the public health message there. But
Right. So
yeah, do you understand what I'm asking? Like, what's the
yeah.
difference between that within the two kinds of viruses? Is it because it's like DNA versus RNA viruses, or?
Well, so with HIV, what it does once it gets inside of an immune cell is it takes its genetic code and sticks it into that cell's genetic code. So essentially, the instructions for making more HIV are now like hard baked into that T cell it infected. So that T cell essentially is just always producing virus because the genetic instructions to make more HIV are integrated into the genetic code of that T cell because HIV infected it, right? HIV has all of the molecular machines and the bits to stick its genetic information into the genetic code of whatever cell it infected. SARS-CoV-2
Whoa,
has none of
that's
that.
fucking crazy. Sorry, does that mean? Remember, not scientist, but okay. All cells, all cells have like nucleuses, right? And that's where
Yep.
you have your DNA. Your
Yep.
Well,
DNA.
as a caveat, except for red blood cells, I don't.
I was actually going to say but then I was like, that's really stupid. Don't say that. But apart from red blood cells, so okay, good, yeah. And like that, you got your RNA, and that is like, it's like your DNA is like, oh my god. It's like the DNA, the gene information, and then the RNA is like where the proteins are made to go into the rest of the cell to make that specific cell do whatever it needs to do, right? Something like that.
Yeah. So yeah, DNA is the blueprint for how things are supposed to be made. RNA is the more precise set of protein building instructions that is
yeah, it's
taken
like
from the DNA.
little, the like almost like what do you call it? Like guideline, like the factory line, the assemble line, right? And it's like kicking things
Yeah,
out.
exactly. Yeah. So RNA
And
is
HIV
the instructions.
disrupts that process in T cells.
Well, so HIV takes advantage of that process because HIV essentially starts out its genetic information is based in RNA. The flow of information goes from DNA to RNA into protein, but HIV it starts out as RNA, and if we're talking about how it sticks its genetic information into ours, right? Ours is DNA, and if HIV its genetic information to RNA, it needs a way to go from RNA to DNA. So it has a special enzyme or protein called reverse transcriptase, which essentially helps that flow of information reverse itself. It goes from RNA to DNA, and then once it has its genetic information copied in a DNA form, then it has other machines, enzymes that will physically take that DNA and stick it inside of ours. So
Holy shit.
it's very sinister.
Is quite a bad virus, isn't it? Like,
Yeah, HIV is
that's
I mean, there's a reason why we haven't found a cure for it, and the vast majority of people who have it, because you can stop it from assembling new virus particles, and you can stop the virus itself from replicating. But where the barrier lies is how do we get HIV's genetic information out of ours? Because if you can root out the cells that have HIV's genetic information inside of them, then you've cleared the reservoir, and that's an actual cure. But that's incredibly hard to do.
This is fucking fascinating. My God. So on that note, like the reason why, I think I ask about HIV is because obviously there were these T cell abnormalities. So in 1 second, I'll ask if it's okay if we just link it back to that paper,
Yeah, of course.
and you kind of explain. People are like, "Wow, we have so many questions," but fucking hell, that's a huge. Oh my god, there's so many questions that have come up there. But to conclude, you're taking from the reading from those papers is that that's not happening in terms of maybe there's some like reservoirs here and there in the body, but there's definitely evidence for that, that we've discussed. But in terms of someone essentially, let's call it what it is, co-opting the narrative around HIV, which is now a well-known disease. It sounds very serious. It immediately gets kind of action. It also had a history of incredible, like, queer people and black people and people of color, from like Southern Africa and India, who are the actual fucking people who saved like their own lives and saved patients' lives, right? Because they didn't give a shit about patents and produced loads of drugs. Woo woo woo. But there's an element of like notoriety around it, whereas long COVID, because people are kind of fed up with COVID, and we kind of had people come in and be a bit like, oh, I don't really care about COVID, and it's like, fine, like most people are unaffected by COVID, but we're specifically talking about very, very sick people. So remember, come back full circle when I showed you guys Physics Girl. Like, most of the people when I worked in HIV services did not know that they had HIV because they had 0 symptoms. This is a very different kind of patient group in my experience. It's not the 80s when you had AIDS patients who were fucking dying of, fungus in their lungs or something, or freaky cancers that no one had seen for decades. It's very different. So on that note, people are like, well, what does it mean then? What do you think it actually means, what was in the Nature paper then? It doesn't mean HIV, but maybe it means something else.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say it means is one, to reiterate, like, yes, there is a very like biological basis for long COVID for at least a substantial swath of all people who have it. And I would say even for people who don't necessarily fit the perfect bill of what was documented in that paper, that doesn't mean that they don't have something else going on either. But yeah, it more or less is confirmation that we've kind of known, at least in the research space for a while, that yeah, there is a biological, physiological basis for long COVID, and anybody who says otherwise is to be disregarded. I think beyond that, it opens up new avenues for research, of course, to probe this interaction between immune system and a potential virus reservoir to see what is chronically angering and tiring out those two kinds of immune cells. It opens up a new rabbit hole to look at dysfunction in someone's endocrine system to see why the cortisol levels are low. If there's something going on in the brain or something going on in the adrenal glands that we don't know about. That's a very, I think, important thing to actually study and understand, because maybe something can be done about it. But I think fourth and most profoundly, this suggests that we now need to start like retooling a lot of research to treating some of these things. We need to understand how these processes are all happening and seeing if we can actually treat, right? If we're talking about a virus reservoir, right? How do we get rid of a virus reservoir, right? We can try giving people monoclonal antibodies. We can try taking people who have long COVID, and when it's time for them to get vaccinated again, we could give them a vaccine and see if that sort of puts the pep back in the step of the immune system and maybe helps it to get rid of that last little bit of virus so everything can kind of reset and go back to normal. There's Pfizer's antiviral Paxlovid, which might prevent that low level of virus from replicating and might calm the immune system down and maybe fix some of the other symptoms that have been going on, right? There are a long list of things that can be tried, and to some extent they are being trialed right now, especially Paxlovid, since that's already pretty ubiquitous in terms of trying to get to people when they have COVID acutely. But It really, I
And
think,
there's
signals a need in the
generics now
research
as
space for
well,
treatment.
so it's going to be an easier thing for people to get in the long run if it helps.
Exactly. Yeah, Paxlovid is cheaper than, a monoclonal antibody infusion or some of the other things that are potentially on the docket to try. So, I think again, it reminds us that there is a big need for treatment, right? We need to start helping people who have long COVID because they're suffering right now, rather than just kind of, poking and prodding around the bushes and skirting around the issue. We need to actually just take a larger, more research community wide dive into the deep end of the pool and see what we get.
Somebody has asked about ivermectin, so I don't know anything about that. I know that it was mainly discussed for acute COVID rather than. I know it's not, being trialed for long COVID. So I have no idea. I'm going to really quickly pop to the Lou, but I don't know if either of you have thoughts on that. My understanding was that ivermectin was shown to, you have to take so much of it, like a toxic amount of it, for it to have antiviral properties, that it's not really useful. But I'll hand that over to you guys because I actually have no fucking idea.
Yeah, even in that toxic amount, it has no antiviral properties. I mean, ivermectin has been trialed all around the world repeatedly dozens of times, and most of those trials show no effect. And one in particular that I remember actually makes people worse off and made them need to go on a ventilator sooner than they otherwise would have. What I'll also say is there is a body of literature that anti-vaxxers love pushing around, suggesting that ivermectin actually is like the greatest thing since sliced bread. But when you look at that body of literature, you see a lot of the trials that say ivermectin does work has very crippling issues with their methods. One in particular actually is what's called the Strongyloides theory, or essentially countries that are underdeveloped where ivermectin was being trialed commonly have its residents infected by parasites. So any clinical benefit was actually the ivermectin doing what it's supposed to do in killing parasites, because it's an anti-parasitic drug first and foremost. And people mistook that for an actual clinical benefit for COVID, but rather the drug was actually killing the parasite and helping the immune system focus more on dealing with the virus. But that's not really like an antiviral effect. That's an accident. So at best, any positive effect for ivermectin was documented to kind of be a consequence of that accident. And at worst, ivermectin has actually hurt people in the case of acute COVID, or in the people who try to take it as a prophylactic, as a preventative. Those people just wind up pooping out their intestinal lining and putting themselves in great pain.
What
So
moment to come back to.
yeah, I don't know if you have anything else to add on that, Corey.
No, I think you did a really comprehensive breakdown of yeah, a lot of the research is like low quality, and of the high, arguably, I don't think there's any really good high quality research, but of the highest caliber research, like pretty much, yeah, no benefit whatsoever. You've tried and tried, and there's like nothing there. There's no signal.
Yeah, I mean, so like I said, guys, I lived in it's a malaria literally turbo jerko. I was just about to say, so guys, I've had my fucking flavor of sicknesses because I've lived and traveled around the world. Again, absolutely none of them pale in comparison to what's the hell that's long COVID. I had dengue, shit myself for 2 weeks. I had fucking malaria, also shit myself for 2 weeks. But I think I had ivermectin for some parasites I had when I was living in a camp in Cambodia, and it's fine for that, but I can't imagine why I would use it for something else. And I wonder if the problem is, in fact, I would be interested, because I know that you guys are left-leaning, right? Because herein is a big question, right? People are naturally very skeptical of big pharma for, I think, the reasons that are probably evident in that, let's call it a system. Let's put the science to one side for 1 second. A healthcare system that prioritizes profit over people's well-being and prioritizes and sometimes shelves medications that help people because they're not profitable, right?
Hmm.
You know, like you have to have orphan drug status and things to try and encourage literally treating people sometimes. Makes people very, very, very wary of, you know, treating, you know, COVID, particularly if there's someone who's like older or something, as quite a serious, you know, illness. And then for some reason, I don't know why, ivermectin got on in vogue as being like a cure without it being a cure. Genuinely, if you could speak to people who were like, no, it must be right, it must be right, what do you feel like you would want to say to them to try and convince them to say, like, take Paxlovid instead? Because Paxlovid, I think, is Pfizer, right? They're the fucking
Yep.
baddies. But I tell you what, I have 2 boxes of Paxlovid. I'm fucking card-carrying socialist, guys, but I have 2 boxes of Paxlovid over there. No ivermectin, because I think if I get COVID again, as someone who has like an impacted immune system from the medication I'm on, I want the thing that means I don't go to fucking hospital. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I know what you mean. Well, so I think I have hopefully some credibility to speak what was brought up. Although I could be wrong about that. But so I understand people's skepticism or towards corporations or even anti-corporate sentiments. I mean, a large part of my decision of pursuing academia is like I pretty much I really enjoy corporations and how they act and behave, etc., etc.
Mhm.
But and I also have a lot of criticisms for the pharmaceutical industry, and I think it's pretty clear that I also have large criticisms to pretty much healthcare, even in Canada and abroad, for pretty much just about any country. But at the end of the day, I think the evidence and the science speaks for itself. Of like, yeah, I can criticize many pharmaceutical corporations all day long. It doesn't stop me from taking my own medication for my own condition. That is backed by decades of good, high quality research. And that hasn't stopped me in the past of like actually, I've been part of clinical trials. I've been on medication that was pre-approval as part of these clinical trials. And so that is more or less like where I lie. Of like, there is totally criticisms to put forth against, like I said, healthcare and pharmaceutical companies, but that doesn't stop something from being therapeutic or effective. And that if you just follow the evidence, and there are totally bad actors when it comes to scientific research and medical research, and I cover it on my own stream. But the vast, and I try to strike a delicate balance, like the vast majority of research and research done by scientists, academics at every level, my experience, the overwhelming majority, they have good intentions. They're totally bad actors, and they exist.
Do you think that's because the scientists are different from? It's a business, right? So people like you 2 guys will be people who are like, I was thinking about this when I did some stuff on like the HIV crisis before. Like doctors were part of the groups that were like smuggling peptides over the border. You know what I mean? And were like secretly helping people. You know what I mean? Like the people who gave a shit and did the work and are the scientists want it to be accessible. Fine, it is healthcare. It's going to cost a bit more than like other commodities for kind of complex reasons, but I would say it's not even actually a commodity, right? But is it because that it's essentially the setup has made people believe that there needs to be private finance, that's the only way, even though half of it's government money anyway, it's the only way that you can invest in science, and therefore people view that process as an inherently corrupt. So any of the information that comes from those processes becomes suspect, right? And then someone's raised a really good point about different people of different ethnicities and different people of color and stuff. Their experiences with healthcare might be really fucking shit, and they
For
might
sure.
live in a community. Yeah, they might live in a community where maybe like fucking women were forcibly sterilized and shit, right? You know. So I don't know. There's a lot to unpick there, but yeah. Again,
For
sorry,
sure.
I'll hand it back over to the experts.
That's why. Well, I'm not gonna claim to be an expert or even anyone with a big brain, but I totally, like I said, just as I understand people, let's say, latching onto research and latching onto ineffective treatments because they are desperate for answers. I understand the skepticism or the outright rejection of a medical establishment that has maybe turned a blind eye to them or has treated them poorly, if not horrifically. So skepticism is understandable. That's why it's like I advocate for being advocate of yourself because when you can because there are still answers there for you. There's still hopefully some hope where again there are totally bad actors and arguably bad incentives. And just as there's poor quality research that I cover on my own stream, the vast majority of research is good, done by good people with good intentions, and is good of good quality. And so the erosion of trust is totally understandable. But the reestablishment of trust has to start somewhere. And I would agree it is beholden on the institutions to reestablish that trust. But it also should hopefully also come from the as well. More or less where my sentiments lie.
Gosh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would
I-
add to that too. Like,
Go ahead,
this is why scientists and physicians need, I think, to modify their political worldviews to like be more people focused and really just be leftists at the end of the day, because
Based.
people who
Based.
don't like approach their work with the sort of higher order thought of like, we're here to help people, we're here to improve material conditions, we're here to try and fill that void where people are looking for answers and they're trying all sorts of wonky snake oil or horse paste or whatever, right? That's the void we should be like actually working to seek to fill, and we can't even begin to do that if we're like saying people made up long COVID or if it's all in their heads or anything like that, right? If we're approaching this from a mentality of like, it's whatever, I'm just here to collect a paycheck or make my own research career be grand, and I'm here just for myself. If we approach it in a very selfish way that's very individualistic, then we're not going to really get anywhere. Like, if we have a greater community focus and people focus, then I think the people who are scared and looking for answers, they'll be more amenable to sort of not going and trying all sorts of wild things that they see online. They'll have more trust in scientists and physicians to be like, okay, you guys are actually trying to find something out for us. You're trying to help us. We'll sit back and wait and do what we can in the meantime. But when people lose that faith and that trust in essentially medicine, to be like, well, I don't think any of you are really doing anything to help me in the first place, I'm going to go help me because that's all I can do, then that leaves them very vulnerable to snake oil salesmen, to falling down all sorts of weird rabbit holes and radicalization pipelines where they'll be eating ivermectin and claim that the Chinese made the virus in a laboratory or something wild like that. Like,
mentioned the horse paste thing, and I forgot that was like people fucking poison themselves because like it's crazy when you think about it. Like, there's an
they have a whole
element though as
cookbook.
well of communication, right? In terms of, I remember, guys, I was working in a minefield at this moment in time. I was used to a element of risk that normal people weren't. And we had this, it was when like we were supposed to go to Ukraine of all places, and all the borders were closing down. And they were like, right, you can go home to your parents or we can continue working here. And we were all like, we're going to continue working here. I eventually got sent home anyway. We all kind of did because COVID. And I remember being like, oh my fucking God, I'm going to kill my mum and dad. And I came back, I flew in, I wore full like mask and thing. I was coming from fucking Asia, like very close to Wuhan as well, and climbed up a ladder into my room. And I was like, if my parents get this virus, I will kill them. So I'm going to stay here. And I played GTA 5 for 3 weeks in my room. But like straight up, I was really scared. But that even as someone who's had their life ruined by COVID, although more likely by my immune system's response to COVID, I think we will come back to that. There's an element of communication. I think what you said, Goat, is totally fucking true. Like, scientists feel like there's a group of people here in chat who we know each other because we're kind of Marxists. Like, I'm a Marxist. Why? Because as a political theorist, Marx fucking tries to use elements of like material sciences within his work. I think that's really important, and I think that should be the basis of good political theory and effective political theory. We won't go down that rabbit hole because we'll like talk about that until like sometime next week. But there is an idea, I think, in people's minds that the people who provide like healthcare and stuff have, people say like, oh, they say 3 Latin words in a sentence and they sort of exist outside of society to help from afar. And then you have the people that do the science communication, which I see you guys are trying to kind of fulfill both areas. But yeah, I actually think that like this kind of citizen science model's really fucking important, and I think it's awesome, and I think both of you are doing that really well, and I think it's needed more and more and more post-COVID because people are actually like a little bit afraid and skeptical now. So definitely keep on doing what you're doing, because I feel like I learn.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah, I definitely appreciate the kind words. And I would totally let's say yeah, my position is like, yeah, scientists and healthcare professionals do themselves no favors when, let's say, they lock themselves up in their ivory towers and just kind of dismiss other people, or they think that they're above certain demographics. Where it's like, yeah, sort of as I alluded to earlier, I think it's holding on the institutions to at least like take the first step. And I think healthcare professionals and scientists should engage with the public more. And even the ones that do it, not that whether I'm good at it or not, I have no idea. But I do see, let's say, see areas for improvement. I would just go by my own approach and sort of like my philosophy and why I approach it the way that I do. It's like, in my experience, people generally don't want to kind of like have orders barked at them of just like, hey,
Yeah.
this is what the science says, and just trust us. Sort of like basically using their authority, so to speak, or perceived authority. Where I will sort of pull upon my teaching experience in terms of teaching students like in the lab, of like, generally I get a better response, if not universally get a better response. Like when a student asks me like, what am I doing as part of this protocol? They don't just want to be told like, hey, just do this. They generally want to know the why. Like, okay, why is this step in sort of like analogy of like to baking, like what exactly is each ingredient doing to make what you are, like it's there for a purpose, it's doing something. And generally speaking, at least in my experience, I get a much universally better response of like, oh, like you're carrying out this step in this specific way because it does this, and I go through the entire mechanism. Whereas like once they actually understand it, then it's like, oh, that totally makes sense, I'm on board. And that's why, at least for me, in my approach, whether it's good or not, I don't know, but this, like I said, I'm just sharing my thought
I
process
think you got to
behind.
try, right? You got to fucking try,
Oh yeah,
or what else is there?
that's
You know?
why I try to do a deep dive on the research, not just like, this research says this, and then move on like this research says this. It's like, what is the paper actually doing? What are the actual researchers, sort of boots on the ground, doing? Provided I can actually explain it and I understand it. It's like, that's why I try to focus a little bit on like methodology. We're not just like, we're not concocting up conclusions. We are carrying out a methodology and trying to generate data and interpret data to provide a body of evidence. And from the evidence, hopefully, that informs decisions. And that's where, at least for me, in my opinion, that's where I think there's maybe room for improvement. Of like, yeah, I don't think I don't think the approach of like, yeah, these are the orders of on high follow is the best approach.
Right, gosh. There's just like so much interesting stuff here, and like You know what? Watching both of your streams, I feel really encouraged. Like genuinely, the other day, it was just serendipitous. I woke up really early for some reason. Like sometimes I don't sleep so good. And you were on, and I turned on your stream because Wildcat had recommended you. And there you were talking about long COVID, and you were taking it seriously, and you sounded like you knew what you were talking about. I just fucking burst out crying because we are sick people who, like, I'm me, so I'm loud and I'm like trying to let people know what it's like, and also I am well into treating myself. Like my doctor probably has a heart attack every time I go to see him, but we also agree that there's no trials in the UK and there aren't any trials planned, so I don't have an option and I can't live like this. Therefore, this information is so fucking important, and I don't mean because there's moral weight for the scientist to make a decision for me. No. I liken myself to somebody who, we watched Dallas Buyers Club. Now, Dallas Buyers Club, to be clear, there's elements of that were illegal, including doctors who were struck off like the register because they did things that were technically illegal. In doing those technical illegal things, they saved lives. And a really important part of that, and I remember watching it with my mum when I was really sick, and we were like, fuck, like this is going to be our lives. They're sat there like debating over papers, and that paper guides the random shit that they're going to put in their body. That I won't speak about it too much because I have promised I like won't reveal too many of the secrets, but that's already happening all over. People are doing the craziest shit. Now, there's some stuff that people are charging people for that I wanted to bring up before we move to back to some theory. But like, I do want you both to know what you were doing from a patient perspective is fucking fundamental. I'm really sick. I need help. People who are intelligent and take the time to explain things really do make the difference. They really do. So if you're ever like, why am I ever doing this? Send me a message and I'll remind you. But,
I appreciate that. I don't take that for granted at all.
Awesome. Did you guys hear about the fucking blood cleaning machines in Germany for long COVID?
That sounds relatively familiar.
Yeah, so this is not immunopheresis, which is the paper that was published recently, which is very interesting. So, okay, hold on. This just because we've been on for 2 hours already, but it's just so fucking interesting. Okay, Ace and Spike stuff, which I know that you've done a lot of that reading, and some people in the community wanted to understand more about that and what it might mean. Autoimmunity, Corey, you're our man. You're our man on that. And just before that, just again to hammer home what people have said about like bad treatments and people taking advantage of it. This was available. I got long COVID 2 years ago, so just over a year into the pandemic, well, almost 2 years into the pandemic, because I got it really late in 2021. Basically, this for-profit German clinic washes your blood, for want of a better term. It does not. It's not, like immunopheresis that like filters out IgG. It's not that. That is in trial and seems to have like, according to that paper at least, patchy efficacy, but enough to say like, kind of like that Nature paper. Look, this is fucking doing something. People are getting better. We need to be doing, B-cell or immune-based therapies. That's their approach, and I personally think that's the right one, but we'll go on to that. But people have spent like their entire life savings going to Germany when they've been really sick, and they've done this. I'll read it out to you, and I'll see what both of you think it would do to a person being going through this procedure. Okay. apheresis on anyone depends on the factors that are removed from the blood. So you see this little thing here, these little machines. People are given an intravenous cannula, so that just means, you know, needles into blood, right? And I think it has to be quite a large cannula because of the machine, and they essentially suck out your blood, pump it through these machines, and put it back in. So it's pretty intense. Like, that is quite an intense thing for your body to go to, but basically people have spent all of their life savings. Unfortunately, quite a few people have ended their lives because it's not worked. But I just wondered what you thought about the way that they sell themselves, and if there's anything that appears to you where, because you guys are the professionals, right? And these people are like, long COVID patients, you've got nothing, come to us, spend all your money, we'll cure you. And people go because, for obvious reasons, they're very scared. Okay. They said Inospheresis reduces inflammatory cytokines, oxidated low-density lipoproteins, environmental toxins, and large molecules, all of which contribute to thickened blood and therefore could affect blood flows. So that is, I guess, some kind of a hypothesis, right? What do you think when you hear that? And is there any guidance you could offer people who read those kind of things from people who are selling cures?
Well, I would
to
say
navigate it.
any sort of health statement that includes like the term that like environmental toxins and is like just ambiguous, is not giving you anything really specific, I would say almost certainly not legitimate. Unless
Bullshit.
unless they say it's like, well, through some unknown mechanism, and they're being honest about that. But like, yeah, like when we talk about, let's say, chelation therapy or like dialysis, like we know like what we're doing. Like there's specific mechanisms that we can talk about when it comes to those things, under the broad category of like, you know, quote unquote filtering your blood. But if it's just saying environmental toxins, or that's included, like at least that's kind of a pretty big red flag for me, if not the biggest red flag.
Yeah, that just sounds like marketing to me, if I'm being honest.
Yep.
It's very much, you know, we see a market here, and if it helps, great. If not, we still make our money, and they don't really care about the people that it doesn't help. So, you
Yeah.
know, to me,
Yeah.
it seems like a very like shotgun style of claims to be like, well, you know, we've seen some evidence in a handful of people. Why not try everybody? Like, it's without knowing
take
more
their
about
money.
the company, yeah, and take their money, of course. Like, without knowing more about the company, like, I'm not sure how true the statement really could be, but it has the air of being predatory, and that
Yeah.
immediately, like much like Corey, sets off red flags in my head.
I'm really glad you said that. The exact same for me. So, this, when I was basically in that like coma state, this came up as a possibility. Now, I considered it, and for some, I don't know what it was that told me, you know what, I think this might be bullshit. But it was the vagueness of certain statements that just didn't easily correspond to my symptoms and didn't easily like explain the phenomena that I had. And this is difficult because I don't want people to become hyperfixated on symptoms and then be like, well, because anything can explain anything then. You know, like you feel a bit tired, it must be because you have like not enough oxygen in your blood, or it could be you have a fucking like, you know, kidney infection. Like it could be so many different things. So that's not what I mean. But I more mean like a grand unified like theory of what you think makes the most sense that's happening to people who are much, much sicker than when they had COVID. Most people with long COVID had a mild, like acute illness. I can't remember the exact numbers. But these are not like, you know, I was sick. It was like the flu, you know, it wasn't nice. I didn't want to go anywhere and I slept for a couple of days. But it was not comparable to what long COVID is. And there were parts where I thought, what does it mean to say the blood is thick? Do you know what I mean? Like, I thought if my blood was thick, I would have gone to the GPs and they just would have been able to tell that, because for me that felt like this is something that's got to be some fundamental shit right here. Like, surely there is a test, because there's no test at the moment apart from potentially whatever is developed from this Nature paper, potentially, that can say you definitely have long COVID, yes or no. You have less long COVID because you have less of this. You have more long COVID because you have more of this. But I don't know. That doesn't make sense. Like, thick blood to me. Is
well,
that a thing?
So that's where it gets tricky, because so based off what I know of COVID and post-COVID syndrome, like totally there is, let's say, it induces a thrombotic state, as in basically blood clots.
Mm-hmm.
Or thrombosis. And so they might be using that term as like a very lay term for this pro-thrombosis or thrombotic state, of just like, yeah, increased likelihood of like blood clotting, as, yeah, just a lay term for thickened blood. I would say it's poor terminology, but but if you're trying to market to, lay people, it makes sense to use that terminology. That's where it gets like tricky. That's where, I can understand how whether this is legitimate or not, I don't actually know. I'd be highly skeptical, but I can see how someone can fall prey to that type of marketing, because there is totally a thrombotic state that is associated with COVID and post-COVID. And sort of to you,
Is that
I just want to
sorry?
wrap
Just a
up.
quick
Yeah,
question.
I just want to say one thing quick to your point of what you brought up. Like, yeah, most
Mhm.
people have a mild course of COVID, but if I remember correctly, the vast majority of post-COVID or long COVID patients come from people that have a mild course. The
Yeah.
difference is like you have a greater likelihood of having long COVID if you have an acute or severe infection. But in terms of a total number of patients, most patients are getting long COVID from a mild course of the condition.
Yes. So basically, this is not, obviously, I don't know about you guys, but I can remember seeing the like terrifying pictures of like people in ICUs in China, like, oh my fucking god, like this is awful, what's happening. And I mean that still is happening, people are still dying on ventilators from COVID. But the understanding I had is like, well, and my experience is acute COVID was unpleasant, but nothing compared to the hell that was long COVID, which just a quick question. Do you know if other viruses cause this? So there's a kind of oddball, not oddball, that's unfair. I'm being a bit biased when I say that. There is a theory that long COVID is this. So COVID has spike, right? COVID spike. I'm gonna hand over to you in a second, Goat, because I know that this spiky stuff is stuff that you know a bit more about. But the idea is that these spikes, they can do a couple of things. They can stay connected to ACE2 receptors, which are everywhere, so it can fuck up a lot of different systems in the body, or it can like stay in your blood and cause micro blood clots. Now, all of these different theorists have their own like explanations for why that causes symptoms, which is actually, on reflection, when I said think about your symptoms, maybe I don't mean that. Maybe I mean think about what you believe has the most explanatory power. And for me, if patients are considering trialing things, try and get into trials. I was offered a couple of places in trials, but in America, so I just can't do that. I'm not well enough. There are no trials in the NHS. If you can, work from safest to, upwards if you have to. Talk to your fucking doctor. Talk to your doctors, guys. And if your doctor doesn't believe you, ask them to put that in their notes. Say, okay, please put in the notes that you think that I don't have long COVID and I would like another doctor, please. and then you have it on record that they didn't support you in that period, shop around, try and find doctors, local doctors that do help you, but stop short of any doctor who tells you that they're about to cure you, because that doesn't exist yet. So that's not true. But okay, going back to this kind of spike theory, there is actually, can you just give me one second, because there's a question from someone who's very, very sick, and I just want to get it and read it out. It's just on my other computer.
Yeah.
So, am I right in thinking the spike is the thing that the virus uses to, like, get into your own cells?
Yep.
Okay. Yep. Because there are a couple of theories that people are sort of at least willing to like contemplate for their own health and stuff, and what they're experimenting with. Most people with doctors, right? That being the most important thing to say here. No one here is a doctor. No one here is your doctor. Please try and use your doctor whenever you can. They asked, can you ask him about the ACE2 receptor system, and whether he thinks the spike will stay in ACE, and whether it will impact your blood system that way, or whether he thinks we've cleared the spike and it's something else. So that's a question from someone from the community.
Yeah, so I mean that's going to be complicated to unpack. I mean, if we're talking about
Yeah.
again viral reservoirs, what that would suggest is that they're, and again, this is something we really don't know. If somebody has a virus reservoir, we don't know what parts of the virus are actually persisting, because in some people, they find essentially genetic material of the virus that doesn't necessarily get turned into protein to like make more spike. Sometimes they do find actual virus protein that persists in tissues too, suggesting that the virus is actually replicating in these reservoirs at very, very low levels. So, in terms of the greater question of like what's causing this coagulopathy that you see when it comes to clotting, I think it's likely for most people. And again, this kind of goes back to Akiko Iwasaki's research, where like she does see a lot of people who have long COVID have microclots. Like that's something that they've actually seen under a microscope. So the microclot thing is very real. The question is it directly related to any bits of the virus, or is it a simple like consequence of the infection, right? And we know that the virus can absolutely infect blood vessels themselves. There's actually a pretty recent paper about that, looking at people who had died of COVID, and they autopsied their blood vessels and their artery plaque that they developed over the course of their lives, and they found virus in the plaque and in the blood vessels. So the virus is very much a generalist. It can the kind of mantra.
Were these people who died in like ice, like people who died of
pre-vaccine era?
People
who died pre-vaccine era. I know they've at least done the follow-up in the lab to see that you can get the actual plaque infected. The cells that make up arterial plaque can most definitely be infected by the virus. But even before that, we've known that the virus can directly infect and damage blood vessels. Those are tissues that, by virtue of what they do as blood vessels, they have to have ACE2, the receptor the virus uses to get inside, in sufficient amounts to do their job for the body. So, the question is there a spike that's persisting that could be causing the microclots? It's plausible. Yes, I don't think there's any hard evidence one way or the other to rule that out or rule that in, but it's possible for sure. I think what's also possible and needs to be considered is the idea that the virus is just damaging blood vessels, and that in turn dysregulates the body's clotting system to favor the, as Corey said, the thrombotic state, or a state that makes somebody more likely to form clots, right? There could be absolutely factors that are involved in the blood clotting system that are simply just thrown out of whack due to the presence of COVID in the first place. And there's some evidence to that because one of the predictors of brain fog, seemingly going back to the biomarker thing, they've done tests in the blood for people who have brain fog for long COVID, and they've found in a fair amount of them, not everybody, but in a fair amount of them, they've had two proteins elevated in their blood. One called a D dimer, which is
Oh yeah.
a protein again that people look at in the blood to see is somebody having like a blood clotting issue right now, and the other one is fibrin, which is a literal component of blood clots. It's a protein that physically makes up clotted blood. So if those people have those biomarkers that are elevated, it suggests there's some sort of ongoing dysregulation of the clotting system. Now, whether that's because there's persistent spike that's doing it, or whether that's because some physical damage was done to the blood vessels and that throws it out of whack, whether it's because of some other factor involved in the blood clotting system that's affected by the infection or directly by the spike protein, that's really not well understood and not known. But I would absolutely, call for more study, and I'm sure there are people much smarter and more up to date on the issue than me actually looking into that. But I think the question's sort of in the right ballpark, but there's still so much to unpack there that it's really difficult to give like a more concrete like yes or no answer. There's a lot of uncertainty there, which sucks because I don't really have like a concrete answer to give you, but there's still a lot of questions to be answered.
If that's the state of the literature, that is the state of the literature. And
Yeah.
do you think I'm right in sort of saying that a lot of the past 3 years of long COVID research has been like, here are these strong correlations. These correlations are, there seems to be like viral reservoirs in some people. There seems to be like the spike hanging out in some people. That correlates with blood clotting issues, which also correlates with these issues, with blah, 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 blah. But at a causal level, we just do not have answers yet.
Yeah, I would say
Probably
so.
won't until people are treated much more systemically,
Yeah, I would say that's a generally accurate statement. I think I won't like unpack this entirely, but I think there's a lot of social and economic issues that have created that state of the literature being basically very correlative and a lot less causal work to actually tie causation for specific biological mechanisms. I think that's just because there hasn't been as much money thrown at long COVID research as there should be. So, I think if there was a big like investment, a big, surge of cash into the issue, then I think you actually might start seeing research groups like really sink their teeth into the causation and get into it. So I think that's just a consequence of the funding ecosystem and not because there are scientists that would love to work on these issues. Like, as much as we talk about the ones that think people are making up long COVID, there are a fair amount of scientists that do want to help. And that's why they got into science, because they want to help, but they just don't have the money to do it. So I
And
think
like everyone else, they're
it's
just
money.
trying to build a career and trying to, pay a mortgage or whatever at the end of the day as well. They're human beings. So I
Exactly.
think the problem is sometimes people who, okay, I'm going to be honest, like I am at a state where I'm trialing infusing monoclonal antibodies on myself. I'm being monitored, don't worry. Like this is a long time like to get to this point, but I'm really fucking sick and I don't feel I'm given an alternative. Now,
Right.
there's a really quite a substantial risk to that, guys. I'm not here to talk about that, but what I'm saying is we are in a Dallas Buyers Club situation. People are just trying things on themselves because the speed and the urgency isn't there. Now, that isn't the scientific community's fault. There are some really good people who are working really hard to try and help patients. We know that, and it's going to take a consortium and a coalition of people who are working together to build the picture. And then, so there's a group in Germany who I might, I've got one last question about just the ACE thing for you, just before we go on to Corey and autoimmunity. But yeah, it's there's groups in Germany who are collecting biomarkers whilst they're treating people, and I think that's probably that should be the model that most public healthcare systems are using. Sadly, it's not what's happening in the NHS. We just get told we're mental and put on disability and left to rot if we're lucky. or we
Mhm.
just get told we're lying and then don't get put on disability. Like I only have a lot of my support, like financial and work support, because other people do a lot to help me as someone who's sick. I work for humanitarian groups, so luckily they take my human rights quite seriously, which is very good. If I worked in the private world, I would have lost my job, straight away. Not a second of a doubt. There's a point as a data scientist, like I couldn't count. It was my brain fog was so bad,
Yeah.
But luckily they just sat there and let me sit in my bed and do my work, and as long as it got there at the end of the day, that's fine,
Right.
But okay, just one quick question, because I know that people will want to know this. Some people have this idea that because the spike, and forgive me, I might not be explaining this idea super duper well because I haven't read the literature.
They're fine.
They say something to the effect of, because the spike uses ACE, it might be binding, and we found the spike in people. It might be binding to your cells and fucking shit up. Because ACE is everywhere, and if you have like your cells being blocked from normal ligands, that's really problematic, right? Do you have any thoughts on that? I know I've garbled that hypothesis really, really badly. That's like really not very good, but I don't know the theory very well. But if you do know what the fuck I'm on about,
Yeah,
do
no,
you have any?
I know what you're referencing. Yeah, so I mean
cool.
the premise is that because of like the active infection, because there's just billions of virus particles and tons of spike protein from the virus being generated, that some of it ostensibly lingers after you're quote unquote not contagious anymore, and causes chronic effects. Even though the virus is gone, there's still persistent spike, whether it's because you just had a gobsmacked ton of it in your system or because you actually have a reservoir. Because they have found circulating spike protein in the blood of people who have long COVID. So like the question is that just left over, or is that because there's a reservoir that's still introducing it into the system? And I think that question is yet to be resolved. But regardless of where the spike comes from, spike binding to ACE2 does have toxic effects, and this is something that anti-vaxxers always use to try and claim that the vaccine spike protein does the same thing, and that's fundamentally untrue. But I'm not going to go there because that's not the question. The question is, does the actual spike from the virus itself, in a chronic capacity for people who have long COVID, can it continuously bind to ACE2 and cause toxic effects? Again, that's plausible. That's plausible. But at least, like, if we're looking at, say, the Akiko Iwasaki paper, for example, we're seeing a lot of these effects be immune mediated in some capacity, whether it's a tired
That's
immune
my
system,
thinking.
autoimmunity, chronic inflammation. The spike could be a contributor to all of these factors, absolutely. But the presence of spike seems to be more of a symptom rather than like a root cause. Like if there's a reservoir, that's obviously what's introducing spike into the system. If there's just leftover spike from the infection, then in theory, if you had monoclonal antibodies to bind spike and deplete it from the system, then that might
You'd
theoretically
immediately
resolve
get better,
symptoms.
right? Yeah, you'd probably have
Right.
a day where you felt a bit feverish. You'd wake up and you'd probably fucking jump out of bed, if
Right.
that was if it was as simple as that. I know you guys didn't get a chance to look, but the paper that's just been released about the people with really long-term, severe long COVID, where it's only when they were reinfected, they were given monoclonal antibodies. The ones, I think it's Pfizer, it's like 2 agents that are used, that are specifically like the spike like subunits, right? And immediately they recovered. And they're like, oh, okay. So this is also in trial as well for that. Hey, Dracula, welcome in on the topic of blood. Thank you so much for the follow. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting. But I know from the groups I'm in, people have tried monoclonal antibodies for a fucking long time, and a lot of people have actually got worse, which it's when this kind of insider information was coming out. which is a shame that like scientists can't get this data. It really is. Like, there's a part of me that's like, does anyone want my blood? Because I'm about to go do some crazy ass shit. And if it works, this could be really good information. But, you know, you can't, right? You have to have trials, and there's a reason for that. And that's just the way it is. And yeah, it's crazy. Those people, I think it's because they were reinfected and then given the monoclonal antibodies that they got into full remission from ME/CFS, which is mad. But I'm just worrying that people are reading it again, not fully understanding the implications of what that paper is trying to say, and then being like, I'm going to go do that monoclonal antibody right now and potentially get much worse.
Yeah, because the
Which,
question
yeah,
is like, what predisposes those people to that success? Like, is there something
exactly.
measurable about them that can be determined for any person who has long COVID that would be like, yeah, you're the perfect candidate for this antibody. Let's get it in you. Or,
Exactly.
you know, that's not something we should do for you. You might have something else going
You
on.
might
Like,
get much fucking worse, and we can't do that. And do you know
right.
what? The writers said, we have no fucking idea because we didn't expect them to get better. We just gave them the monoclonal antibodies because we thought they were going to die of COVID, which is mad. And for people who don't know how, and you guys can expand on this, and then I'd say it might be nice to move on to the autoimmune theory, which is the theory that I'm operating on the assumption of I think that it's something similar like that for me. Yeah, these what was I saying? Brain gone. This is a perfect example of brain fog. That's what Yale is trying to figure out with the Paxlovid trial. Hello, welcome in, potential fellow long COVID sufferer, who receives pontificatives and what? Yes, exactly. So, Paxlovid, it's in trial in a couple of centers. I think the Stanford trial stopped short. Am I right in saying that? Am I right in saying that? I think. Because so there is a paper here which hello fellow long COVID hauler. So welcome in. I'm here with two awesome streamers, Corey and Homozygote, Homogoat, the homoest of all the goats. And they're amazing, like scientists who take long COVID really seriously. We're sort of talking through everything. If you've come from like Reddit and places like that, you might kind of know a lot about what we're talking about. But I would say, so my excuse me guys, I'm just like a published scientist. I'm just like a fucking scientist, right guys? I'm a scientist queen because I'm going to be in a peer-to-peer reviewed paper it's undergoing review at the moment. But this is the series of case studies that was on Paxlovid. So I managed to convince an Indian doctor to give me some Paxlovid. I took 3 boxes of it. Fuck my poor liver. And absolutely nothing changed for me. I was still really sick. Okay, braggy. Sorry, I'm just like a dual like queen. I do my politics and then I do my science in my spare time. No, I don't. I literally just gave them information. That's it. I did nothing. Alison, who is an awesome human being, who is a professor at the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics, is the person who wrote this paper. She is also somebody who's suffering from long COVID. So absolutely amazing human being. This is a series of case studies. Now, from my understanding, when you're looking at different trials and treatments, you have case studies. Then, depending on the kind of drug and whether it's used already, a phase 2 or a phase 3, and then a phase 3, and potentially an extended phase 3 that is combined with like getting bits of information. And then normally when a drug goes to market or a treatment is rolled out, you have something called a phase 4 where they take real-time data. And if they're like, oh my fucking god, it turns out everyone after 2 years died or something, you know, they call quits on it. Am I right in saying that, or is there more to it?
I mean, overall, I think this is a pretty accurate workflow. Like, I mean, generally speaking, yeah, case studies, they're more like exploratory or like, trying to lay the foundation. Like, is there a signal here that's worth pursuing? And speak, or trying to call
Mm.
attention to, unique cases that maybe people aren't aware of.
Exactly. So the reason why I said that is because those monoclonal, so it was 3 patients, and the case study was about 3 patients who had the anti-COVID spike monoclonal antibody cocktail, which is I can't remember the names, something MABs, during a period of reinfection, and then had spontaneous remission. What won't be in those papers is, did they try it for anyone else and it didn't work? Did it make someone else worse? Blah blah blah. Because I don't know if I'm right saying this, and you guys can call me out on my bullshit here, but scientists will, and particularly like these were clinicians who were looking after people, so they did something and it helped made someone better. So they're going to be like, holy fucking shit, we need to publish this because publishing is good. And also, exactly like you said, there's a signal here. I think that we should put this into the world and try and just put it out there into the literature for people exploring it. But would that be the same if someone, let's say they did those 3 studies and all those people got worse? Do you think that would always result in a case study series like that, or
Uh,
is it kind of biased to? Do you know what I mean?
well, I mean, generally speaking, at least in my experience, case studies are usually, at least case studies when it comes to trialing a therapy, usually like typically published with like at least neutral or positive outcome. Uh,
Mm.
where at least I could be wrong, but in my experience of the case studies that I come across, my experience, like it's never like, yeah, this was a massive failure. We should abandon this. I've never come across that.
I mean, that must happen,
I'm
right?
sure
There
it does.
must
Well,
be.
that's sort of inherent to the system, which I'm not saying this is a good system at
Exactly,
all.
yeah.
Uh, but like, yeah, the let's say incentive is like only publish the signal.
Yeah. Understood. Okay, on that note about signals, so yeah, just to make clear, that case study, that the series of 12 case studies was very mixed, kind of as we'd expect. Some people got into remission from taking Paxlovid, some people were like me and absolutely nothing changed. For me, on a personal level, it felt safer. It felt a safer choice in degrees of, I'm very sick, I'm alone, what am I going to risk, in support with as many doctors and, clinicians as I can get on my side. That was a relatively easy win because I got it at the time that they started making the generic in India. So if you can find a doctor to support you with that stuff or get on a trial, I don't regret trying that just because it didn't work. It's still given me information for in the same way it will give wider people information about what might be happening in the patient population. It might help you, work out your next steps. So, fucking autoimmunity, mate. What the fuck is why? Okay, you can explain autoimmunity probably quite well, but my question is going to be twofold. One, what kind of is the general theory for autoimmunity and long COVID? And two, this very good Nature paper, me no can read very good science. Me read this and it says, nah, it probably isn't autoimmune. And then I'm like, fuck, because the only things that have ever helped me have been quite intense autoimmune medication. I'm not going to say what because that's too dangerous, to be honest. But like, I can't find a molecular pathway with that drug where anything else makes any sense.
Mhm.
So what does this section mean? Could you describe in as accessible way as possible kind of what autoimmunity means in terms of the current long COVID theory? And then if you know this study well, can you talk about this? If not, don't worry.
Sure, I can try.
Thank you.
But if anything is incomprehensible, let me know, and I'll give it another go. But I can't guarantee
Yes, yes.
that
I am
I can
listening.
I
I'm
can
just
turn
grabbing some
something.
water.
Yeah, I can't guarantee that I can turn something incomprehensible to something comprehensible, but I'll always do my best. But well, I mean, so I guess maybe just a very broad, super zoomed out overview of autoimmunity. I mean, just like direct translation. Auto is like, if I remember, like Latin for self, like translates to self immunity, as in for whatever reason, the body is attacking the self, or the immune system is targeting the self. Where when it comes to, let's say, your immune system, there is always this delicate balance of trying to distinguish between self and non-self. That's why, like, sort of your immune system goes through training and try to sort of establish like ground rules, or like establish like what the self is, and then from there, uh, only attack ideally the non-self things or invaders. But yeah, with autoimmune conditions, that balance has gone awry for whatever reason, largely for reasons that we don't really know fully exactly. That like, yeah, it starts targeting the self. How this links to COVID, so just as with pretty much like virtually every autoimmune condition, we don't have really great understanding or perfect understanding. Obviously, given the fact that COVID is new, obviously uh, not much understanding there either. But there are some hypotheses, and there's some evidence to back up some of these hypotheses. Where so when it comes to autoimmune conditions, generally, they are sort of broadly speaking seen as an overactive immune system. Where again, for whatever reason, the immune system just appears to be ramped up. And that's why the general strategy for most autoimmune conditions is to pretty much suppress the immune system or some sort of immunosuppressive therapy. Now, how this may connect with
Welcome
long
to Flavor
COVID
Country.
is, so there's the hypothesis, especially given the fact that, yeah, as mentioned earlier, you are at greater risk of basically getting a long COVID if you have severe COVID infection. And so it's potentially thought, okay, that, during a SARS-CoV-2 infection, your immune system, has to be turned on to a certain level. And maybe in the case of a severe infection, it needs really ramped up. But then at some point, it's got to turn off, or at least ideally, it's got to get back down to baseline levels. And so it is thought that, something has gone awry with the off system or the down regulation system. Now, the reason why that might be, I don't think is fully known, where it's hard. Yeah, doing research on COVID and long COVID is difficult because, we don't have, let's say, good data, pre-COVID, or like what the ideal healthy person looks like in the absence of COVID. Where, yeah, it's thought that maybe for some people, a subset of people, just as in other autoimmune conditions, very often autoimmune condition is preceded by some sort of viral or bacterial infection, and therefore it's like triggered, or that might act as a trigger event. And so in that case, for maybe some subset of patients, COVID is actually acting as that trigger event. And there's also some evidence to point to that maybe for some people, although I don't think the evidence is super strong. So this is all like hypothesis, where
Mhm.
yeah, we know that there's for a large portion of autoimmune conditions, there is a genetic component. Um, and so some people are sort of on the pathway to developing an autoimmune. And so it's also thought that, you know, for this subset of patients, COVID is acting
Sorry, go on.
pretty much. These individuals would have developed an autoimmune condition anyways. It's just like the SARS-CoV-2 infection is just the trigger event, where it's just like they're just developing it sooner or like this is the event that triggers it, they probably would have developed it anyway, potentially. And there's also the fact, okay, that yeah, going back to your body or your immune system, trying to determine what is self versus non-self. COVID might be introducing sort of a wrench in that system, where there's this concept of viral mimicry, where
Yeah, I literally was like, sorry, just pause 1 second. My internet flagged for a sec.
Yeah, no problem.
Sometimes does this. I just searched molecular mimicry because I know there's just because I want people to listen to you. So let's wait for them to just come back in for one sec.
Sure. No problem.
For everyone who is not a scientist, I advise, and like particularly people who are long COVID sufferers who want to work out, or actually, you know what, just fucking anyone because knowledge is good, right? There is a book that I read before I started doing. I am doing an online undergraduate really slowly in biochemistry. Fuck chemistry is all I have to say. Chemistry is so hard. I hate it so much. But there is a book called Immune, A Journey to the Mysterious System That Keeps You Alive, which is, there is a guy who does YouTube
That's a Kyrgyzstan
videos.
textbook.
Yeah, it's so good. And I think if you're someone like me who I couldn't have just gone straight into studying, it's been what 15 years since I was at high school. I needed a refresher. I needed something that got my brain in the game about science and the immune system and stuff. And this for me was a great kind of anchor point into learning about it. I'll post a link to it for everyone to read it, and then you can. I agree, fuck chemistry. Yeah, I'm sorry, I think are both of you biochemists? Because fuck chemistry. What the fuck is chemistry?
Well,
what even is it?
I'm currently a biochemist, but my undergraduate degree was in cell and molecular biology, but my graduate studies is technically biochemistry. But where the dividing line
Okay.
is between biochemistry and molecular biology, I don't think is fully defined.
I see why you are a proponent of psychedelics then, frankly. Chemistry, it's just I don't know, on a personal level of my own understanding, biology feels more like a relationship between systems, which I like, and you learn at different lenses and different levels. I know that I'm learning still at a very entry level place, so that's different from further down the line. But then in order to study at university level, it's lesson 1 chemistry. I was like, oi, I signed up to a biology class, what the fuck is this? But I will send this thing. I think people are back in now, so thank you for holding on.
Yeah,
But
no problem.
this, you can probably find a PDF of it online for free, or if not, you can watch his stuff on YouTube. But I'll send that to everyone now for your learnings. Sorry. Okay, molecular mimicry, and we're back.
Well, not
Thank
to
you.
let's say bash or whatever talk poorly of a fellow science content creator, but I think in my opinion there's some issues with Kyrgyzstan content.
Oh,
Yes.
really?
That's just my opinion though.
Yeah,
Is it
there
enough? Is it
it's
enough? Sorry, go on.
the issues are because they let different people write every video. So it really depends on who specifically is making the videos, because the ones about the immune system and the ones that comprise that book that you were talking about, those are pretty good. Those I would recommend to anybody unquestioningly. But beyond that, it gets really dicey. They recently had one that was very pro lab leak conspiracy, which was very bizarre. And then I tracked down who wrote the video, and it's oh, okay, that person's just a crank. Somehow they allowed this guy to write one of their videos. So
Someone
you
called
have to be
Chud
very careful.
Machug 88.
He might as well have been. I mean, with the things coming out of his mouth, good lord. But
Also,
yeah, you have to be careful.
it doesn't matter where. I'm sorry, this is my take. If you care about what country, where it came from, you're hyper fixated on like blaming some random like nation state for sickness or for whatever happened during COVID, whereas it's a problem now and that should be your focus. That's my personal take. Like, I saw people like saying awful things in the UK about where HIV came from in the gay community. I had to like do a lot of work with people living with HIV to as a part of therapy about like where it came from and stuff. These kind of discourses never end well. You know what I mean? It
Yep.
never ends with like, and then we all got along and science worked really well, Anyway,
mean,
sorry, continue.
Yeah, I mean that's a whole separate discussion, but at the very least, like it is at least important to like address it, not from like a what do you do about the virus perspective, but more because like people, if they are willing to believe it was made somewhere else, then they don't want to like dedicate funding. Instead, they want to like invade another country. So it's a distraction ultimately, and you just have to like refocus people on like let's do something about the virus that we have now. So the more people
Yeah.
hyperfixate on origins, the less actual work gets done. So it's worth talking about just to refocus people's attention and energy
I
to
see
something
what
more
you
productive.
mean, to anchor people back in. Yeah.
Exactly. But yeah,
But like, if you
the
hate Chinese people because of COVID, you are probably just a racist. I'm just
yeah.
gonna say that.
Oh, of
You know what I
course.
mean?
Yeah, no, I would co-sign that. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Anyway, sorry.
But
Continue.
yeah, I mean,
Autoimmunity.
yeah, I'll throw it back to Corey.
Well, yeah, I'll try to pick up where I left off. I think talking about sort of, yeah, I guess one of the other hypotheses or thought processes in terms of how autoimmunity relates to long COVID. I think, yeah, the last thing that I was sort of touching upon was this viral mimicry or molecular mimicry aspect, where, so again, one of the many ways that your own body tries to establish the difference between self versus non-self. It's like, yeah, there are certain patterns on, let's say, the proteins in your body that like your body recognizes as self. But there may be, essentially, when it comes to SARS-CoV-2 and the viral proteins associated with SARS-CoV-2, there might be some cross reactivity in terms of like some of the protein or protein products or peptides from the viral particles. They may resemble some of your own proteins or the patterns on your proteins, and therefore your body is reacting to those, basically falsely flagging uh, the the viral particles. Uh, well, yeah, since it gets trained to notice these viral particles, but the viral particles sort of like flagged as self, then your body starts attacking those actual self proteins associated with cells. That's
I
sort
have
of
just a quick question on
yeah.
that because
That's a very zoomed out, as best as I
yeah.
can describe it, situation.
So to re-clarify for people, the theory is COVID and potentially some other viruses, including herpes, that some of the literature is like saying maybe because herpes stays in you forever, right? Like or Epstein-Barr, which can hang out sometimes in different parts of like people's B cells and other things. That's like the norm in the population. I think it's estimated like 90% of people have had Epstein-Barr.
Yeah, but it's for some of those viruses, like they're actually like uh embedded in your like genetic code.
Yeah, they're
They're like,
dormant, right?
yeah,
So they're not. Yeah,
they're latent being reactivated. And
because
that's
of something.
yeah, and that's
Some
yeah, without getting to the machinery behind that. But those are genetic sequences. As opposed to when it comes to like this viral mimicry, this is almost certainly at the protein or peptide level, sort of like a step above. It's not the fact that or it's almost certainly not the fact that some cells in your body have genetic sequences or SARS-CoV-2 genetic sequences embedded in your own genetic material. It's almost certainly, almost unequivocally not that. It's more the fact that your body, your immune system, wants to recognize, okay, viral particles and viral proteins as foreign invaders. Okay,
Yeah.
but it just so happens that those foreign invaders, they resemble closely things on your own cells and tissues. You can kind of like they're just happen to be dressed up very similarly. And therefore your body just can't really fully distinguish it. Where it's like, yeah, it legitimately wants to mount an immune response against the virus and viral particles and viral proteins. But in the process of doing that, it has to generate antibodies, okay, and a whole host of other, immune system responses. But a part of that is the generation of antibodies. But those antibodies are trained or generated to recognize, let's say, zoomed out. Try to make it comprehensible, like the clothing of the virus or viral particles. Like, okay, this is what the virus and viral particles look like. But it so happens that there's overlap with some of your cells and tissues. Those antibodies that are lingering around, once it actually presumably clears the virus or all the viral particles, like, yeah, it will also start potentially attacking your own cells and tissues.
So, gosh, okay, that I think is really important for people to try and understand. This is why actually I read that immune book, because of what you just said. I was like, whoa, what the fuck does that mean? Like, I didn't even know before I read that there was a difference between like the innate immune system and the adaptive immune system and everything in order to understand exactly what you said. So if we try and get down to this signaling level, because I think that's what's very interesting, right? Because from my understanding, again, please challenge me if this is bullshit. If you took a random mixed population sample of people who are infected with viruses, it's likely for a brief period of time, people have autoantibodies. It's just we have certain cells, like regulatory T cells and B cells, that try and stop this signaling from staying on your own cells. And then essentially, you just go back to being normal and having the benefit of having memory B cells that will be able to produce antibodies quickly and effectively in the way that vaccines do, right? To if you're presented with the similar virus or whatever the infection is, right? Now, is that right or is that bullshit?
No, I'm pretty much gonna say like, yeah, like so the immune system is super complicated, and there's multiple levels of like regulation. But everything that you said is, yeah, continue what you were saying, basically.
This is, of course, I have to fucking have potentially an autoimmune disease because it's so hard, guys. It's a very, very, and like, there was a part of me that almost was a little bit hesitant to kind of discuss this with people because it's like, dare I say it, there's an element where there are some like scientific problems that are easier to fix. Autoimmunity is not easy to fix. Lupus is still being treated through novel experimental treatments because it's hard. MS, on the whole, most of these things, the approach is getting people to remission and lowering, the markers that are known in those diseases. This is actually why I asked you about Crohn's the other day, whether B cells were involved, because I was kind of interested if it had a similar treatment model, because I know there are some like monoclonal antibodies that are sometimes used alongside steroids and things. But sorry, my question is, you said the signaling that, so when you're innate immune, you've got a fever, you feel like fucking shit, you've got little fire bombs going off in your body and your innate immune system's going crazy and is trying to just kill this thing that's invaded you, yeah? And then potentially there's like almost like a communication error where something that is bad looks really similar to your own cells. And then your body gets confused. Do you know exactly what cells are implicated there and whether they turn up in the long COVID literature?
Well, it will vary by each autoimmune condition. But to put it crudely, maybe not the best analogy, but it's essentially friendly fire. Think of it like,
Yeah,
yeah,
it
if
is, yeah.
if you're an invading army, but you're you're engaging with invaders that are just like dressed up in civilian clothing, you're gonna have a hard time determining who's a threat and who's not a threat. Um, and that appears to be, again, going for a subset of patients that might be playing a part for this induced autoimmunity, or yeah, these long COVID patients that appear to have some autoimmune effects, and this
Welcome to Flavor
generation
Country.
of autoantibodies, where, as you alluded to earlier, even taking healthy people or whatever, without defining what healthy people are, but typical people, in the absence of a disease or condition, like they will have, as highlighted in the research, like they'll have, even specifically in some of the research that you sent, like they'll have auto antibodies against those G
Right.
protein coupled receptors. It's
Yeah.
just like, yeah, it's at a very baseline level and it doesn't appear to have any negative effects, because, like, again, your body is pretty much like always in a state of trying to determine self versus non-self, and hopefully deal with actual invaders that are actually foreign invaders, and so it's pretty much like always in this perpetual state of like trying to strike that balance. Like your immune system is pretty much like always active, provided you have one, and it's not like uh, you know uh, eliminated by some sort of therapy. Um,
Yeah, if you're
and
a cancer patient or something who's undergoing intense chemotherapy, you might not have this immune system to kind of fight in the same
well,
way.
it would be heavily suppressed, but you will likely still have some elements but there are some very invasive treatments to, let's say, reset the immune system, where it's like, yeah, they'll pretty much like wipe out your entire immune system. But those are largely like stem cell therapies that are like, yeah, very extreme.
Which is in trial for long COVID as well.
Uh, I that might be true. I have no idea, but it wouldn't necessarily surprise me. But that seems like very
I think they've done a phase 2, I think.
uh
Let me check
Well,
whilst you're
so I want to make the distinction. Like, there are
Yeah.
stem cell therapies that are, let's say, not that invasive, but the ones that I'm talking about, these are like really invasive, arduous. There's risk of actual dying because once you wipe out an entire patient's immune system, they are prone to pretty much like anything that comes across their way.
They could leave the hospital and pick up a
They
cold and
they would not be
die.
allowed to leave the hospital under those conditions. The ones
Wow,
that I'm
okay,
talking
yeah,
about,
fair enough.
these are generally very invasive, where it's like, yeah, the benefit has to dramatically outweigh the risk. I would be surprised if that type of intervention is being trialed for long COVID, because I can't
I
imagine.
don't think it is. So this is one of the trials I got invited to. I know that there are different kinds, right, of stem cell therapy. Yeah, there we go. I'll just post it
Yeah,
on
the ones I'm
chat.
referring to, these are sort of like hematopoietic stem cell. Like, these are like very invasive.
Is that the ones that they also use on organ transplant patients for the same reason, which is let's say you are sometimes, like transplanting someone's heart or something, like an organ they can't live without, so you just have to do this. I think sometimes they
Yeah,
offer these therapies in order to,
yeah.
during the
So
period in which the organ's settling in, you bring the immune system right down so it doesn't reject it, basically.
I don't know if has been used specifically for that. That also seems pretty invasive, but I know that it has been trialed for certain autoimmune conditions, where it's like, yeah, they pretty much like exhausted all their options. Their condition is severe, and sort of as a last ditch effort, they are enrolled in these trials of like, well, we can't suppress the immune system, so let's try to reset it, or like give you a new immune system. But in the process of that, they have to wipe out your current one, and they have to have some sort of donor. This is like a very invasive stem cell therapy that is typically, at least for autoimmune conditions, like a last ditch. Um,
Oh, here we go. So yeah, I'll post it on the group so you can see it as well. But yeah, I knew that they would have finished or had some preliminary data, but they've done some the people who are doing these stem cells might wait, how do you say
Yeah,
that word?
mesenchymal. So yeah, that is not definitely
Yeah.
not like that is a stem cell
Yeah.
therapy, but it's not in the vein of what I'm referring to. When I'm referring to is sort
Okay.
of, yeah, hematopoietic. And yeah, sort of in the vein of autoimmunity. Like I said, the body is trying to always strike this delicate balance, and because your body is always exposed to foreign invaders, even in just like the food that you eat, it has like there are
Mm.
foreign invaders, and like monitoring your GI tract, okay, for foreign invaders, like they're trying to strike a delicate balance there of like, yeah, we should target this and not this. And so like, yeah, your immune system is always being regulated. And so and it's always sort of like being trained or like retrained or in this continuous sort of like evolution. Um, because it's always being exposed to new things. And so like, yeah, there'll be a generation of antibodies, but generally speaking, at least typically, the antibodies are trained to recognize self versus non-self, or like the cells that generate the antibodies or trained to recognize.
Can you give because I find this really interesting because there is a hope that on a personal level, one of the medications I'm taking also increases regulatory T cells, which I know is supposed to be some kind of mechanism to help this, but I don't know how. And something you've taught me recently is you have to look super fucking close at these, like the exact kind of pathways that's happening in diseases. Like if you have this general, like, take a steroid because, you know, you have low cortisol, you know, like we saw earlier, like that might not be the best approach for this kind of quite substantial disease. So there are different categories of like T cells and B cells and things, and we've just found out that from the Nature paper at least that there are a bunch of them that are sort of being used a lot, seemingly by an unknown origin. Do we know like what B cells like are there regulatory things, and can these be used? Can you have like a monoclonal antibody that's like supportive in that way? We've got some questions from chat as well just after this, but yeah, do they treat people with like lupus or something or MS with these kind of like helping on this signaling way, or is it
Well,
more comprehensive?
no, totally. At least when it comes to signaling and treating certain autoimmune conditions in this way is totally a thing where, yeah, even just using my own condition or rheumatoid arthritis. So I mean, one of the I think most profitable drug is Humira or adalimumab that targets a specific protein called TNF alpha or tumor necrosis factor alpha that is involved in inflammation.
Oh, that's come up. What's that boy? What's he do? Who's that?
Oh, so that
It's like a
is
signal for information or something,
it is
or?
yeah. So it's in the category of cytokines. You can think of cytokines as basically, you know, how your immune system communicates, sort of like chemical messengers that your immune system uses to coordinate itself and regulate itself. And so tumor necrosis factor alpha, or TNF alpha for short, that is a cytokine. It binds to a particular receptor, you know, named the TNF alpha receptor, but there's two of them. It happens to bind to TNF alpha receptor 1. And, well, so without getting into the nitty gritty details, because it's like super complicated and like it requires like an entire lecture, but basically, as a result of you neutralizing that molecule, okay, the TNF alpha circulating in the blood, it can no longer bind to the receptor. And so, since it can no longer bind and activate the receptor, it downregulates inflammation or the inflammatory response that is associated with, let's say, rheumatoid arthritis, and let's say my own condition. And it's also used, I think, for ankylosing spondylitis, maybe psoriasis as well. But like, yeah, it's used for a variety of autoimmune conditions. Because, well, this is where it gets sort of tricky. Like, we target that because we just happen to see that it appears to be upregulated in these conditions.
Mm.
But there's not, at least as far as I know, there's not a lot of good reason to think that that is the actual cause of like just
And therefore, by treating just that, you'll put it in remission, right? Because
yes. Just as to use what you brought up, corticosteroids, like those are pretty much like used for virtually every inflammatory condition known to man, just because, yeah, they are highly potent, they are highly anti-inflammatory, and they work quickly. But
it can be quite unpleasant to take, though, can't they?
yeah, there are
Like,
a whole host of negative side effects associated with long-term steroid use, and also like you're not actually addressing like the root cause of it. It's just like a really good way of treating inflammation or an inflammatory state. Like it's pretty much like using like the nuclear option, so to speak, but they are highly effective.
on this note, someone's asked an interesting question, which is, recently, someone I know propagated the idea of an immunity debt. The idea that masks inhibit exposure to viruses and weaken our immune system's ability to adapt to new exposures. How do I convince someone that they are spewing total bunk science without losing my mind and calling them a dumbass? That's from Devil. Good luck, Devil.
Can you repeat that for a second?
Someone I know propagated the idea of the immunity debt. So the idea that masks inhibit exposure to viruses, right?
Okay,
And
yeah,
that
now I get it. Yeah.
weakens our immune
Basically,
system.
sorry to cut. Yeah, well, yeah, I think I get it now. In terms of like, oh, yeah, you need this exposure, to have a healthy immune system or to be healthy. Sort of like the analogy of like, well, you need your kids to play in dirt to develop healthy.
Yeah.
I don't think there's
Get typhoid, kids. That's
yeah.
how you stay healthy.
I don't think there's any evidence
Yeah,
to
that's
back that
the
up.
hygiene hypothesis, and
Yeah.
that's a myth.
Yeah, I find there's an element of me that I don't know, maybe I'm being too fucking like pearl clutching like white person, but I feel like people are very like, yeah, look overseas, they don't have like autoimmune conditions. I'm like, yeah, because they don't have a fucking health service that can half of the time even like identify something as simple as fucking sepsis. Like, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about, and then they just make up this idea that people are like living in some like symbiotic happy place with where viruses aren't trying to like actively hack into us and kill us so that they survive.
Yeah.
So I don't know, it feels very like, I don't want to outright call it racist, but it certainly feels like it's propagated on a bit of a flimsy understanding of what people, at least in the communities I've worked with, experience in terms of like actual needs of healthcare and systems that understand their healthcare, which is not the best,
Yeah, especially when it comes to like developing countries, like they generally have like more pressing matters of like food
Yes.
security, famine, just like
Exactly.
clean water. Those are way more
And
immediate.
a lot of the healthcare services were built up during like in relation to like the last pandemic, which was HIV, right? So there are very like specific specialities, and if you've got that, you might be okay. But then yeah, I could do a stream for like 10 years about like health in developing countries and stuff, but yeah, Vez says that's similar to how back in the 60s there weren't any autistic people. It's like, no, we just potentially have developed an understanding of how to like identify people and support them. Yeah, it's a kind of I don't know if there's a specific term for it, but a blindness, right? To a data blindness where you're like, oh, I can't see it there, therefore it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Rather than looking for other explanations for it not being there. They existed and they struggled through life. Yeah. I am Red Falcon. I'm not quite sure what this question is. Did we answer the Gaber Mate? I don't know who that is. Question.
Oh,
It's
they're a
relevant-
physician that specializes in
Okay.
trauma, if I remember correctly, generally speaking.
Okay. I don't know what the question is. Sorry, so you might have to re-ask it. Is this someone who's like everyone who's got a chronic illness actually needs psychotherapy? Because I'm incredibly, yeah, my hackles are up immediately when I hear the word trauma instead of biological healthcare needs, but I will try and put my hackles down. They may have gone, but okay. If you know who that is and you know what they're referring to, trauma relationship to autoimmunity and illness as a part of the problem.
Oh,
I don't know.
okay. Then I understand the question. As far as I know, so like yeah, there's some evidence to show, if I remember correctly, like yeah, you know, well, so trauma it does appear to without defining what that is like a thing.
I was going to
But
say what kind of trauma.
yeah, I don't really want to go down that road. But like yeah, let's
Okay.
say trauma, capital T. Like yeah, there's some evidence to show like yeah, it induces physiological change at multiple levels. One of them appears to might be the immune system, and so there's some correlation between trauma and let's say promoting an overall inflammatory state or promoting inflammation. But yeah, I think at least in my opinion, it's a little bit too early to sort of say that trauma causes any sort of autoimmune. I really don't think that
It's
has a.
potentially another cat and mouse issue as well, insofar that I know that there are kind of other. Thank you so much for the follow. Welcome in, buddy. Dibzaz. That's a tongue twister of a name, but thank you so much for the follow. Welcome in. Yeah, some we were talking about trauma. Okay. Some aside from being traumatized from being ill, I know that there is somewhat of an emerging link in the literature between also experiencing psychological trauma and having states of inflammation, right? So again, it's like one of those, well, maybe these things are, like you said, there's like a signal out there, but in terms of it being pursued, I don't know. I mean, I can tell you, yeah, my approach to my own healthcare is through medication, and then the mental health side of it is holistic rather than
I mean, yeah, absolutely. Mental health is important,
I mean,
and if anything, I don't think there's that much of a distinction between mental health and physical health. But like, yeah, I would never discourage anyone from seeking mental health treatment or seeking trauma treatment at all. Definitely not. I just more like, yeah, I would want to be prudent in terms of like linking any sort of causation between trauma and autoimmune conditions. Because I don't think that's
I
very.
agree, and I'm this is my opinion, and you guys don't have to share it. But we open this with watching Ren. Ren, who's the really good artist from the UK, who also so he suffers from what he calls Lyme disease. There's a whole thing there. We won't go into it. He now calls it an autoimmune condition. Fair enough. That's what he thinks he has, and I think that is what he's been diagnosed. His song "Sick Boy" is about the experience of being somebody whose body is incredibly sick and who has manifestations of like extreme biological issues, being reduced to the model of the NHS, which is someone tried to do this with me, a therapist, and I just laughed at them, but they were like, you clearly have negative thoughts about walking, and I was like, I think you're full of shit, and I'm gonna go get some actual healthcare. Now that doesn't mean I didn't also need lots of mental health support whilst being ill. I still did. It's just I would say, like, one of my close friends, like I said, has rheumatoid arthritis. My approach to it wouldn't be you are going to treat your autoimmune disease by having therapy, but it might be that, similar to what you were saying with CBD, there's some kind of signals out there that say your experiences and potentially your overall well-being could maybe be better if you also pursued like looking at therapy alongside stuff.
Yeah,
But
people will absolutely benefit from when appropriate addressing their mental health and seeking treatment for trauma when appropriate. But yeah, I don't think it will treat their autoimmune condition, provided they have one. Is it might be a contributing factor? Absolutely. But I don't think there's any evidence to show that, like, yeah, providing trauma treatment is going to improve or treat an autoimmune condition. It'll be beneficial,
Not
I have no
quite
doubt.
woo-woo. Yeah. That unfortunately, so you know, at the very start, I said like MECFS is the thing. We were learning about that, and in the UK, there was something called the PACE trial, which is really notorious. The PACE trial was a psychological intervention to people that had post-viral syndrome, of which long COVID now is a type, right? Whether it's the same, we don't know. We don't have the answer to that yet. That's fine. But they published results in the fucking Lancet of all places that were like fucking 60-70% efficacy, mate. Everyone got better. We had like loads of people in remission. It's really good. Clearly, cognitive behavioral therapy and exercise, forced exercise, is the answer. Now, loads of people that were in the trial pushed back and were like, I was in this trial and I almost fucking died. So, you know, and I don't see that data point like anywhere. You know, if you are exploring a therapy that you kind of are supposed to, at least, I don't know, does this apply for psychology as well? Like, an adverse effect is an adverse effect, right? So people were like, why isn't this coming up? They then had to take the people who were running it to court to get the data, and then they republished the data, and the efficacy was 3 to 6%. And that guided for like 20 years clinical care for people in the UK. So yeah, that's I think why a lot of people are very wary of that psychology stuff, which in the best possible world, you would have a holistic approach to patient care that would give people all of the above. Do you know what I mean? It would give people access to whatever therapies they needed to address what we've spoken about today, which is like, you know, is it, you know, a persistent virus hanging out? Is it an autoimmune thing? Is it some kind of both cascading system where, you know, the virus is just not being cleared and it's activating, you know, your immune system, which looks similar to an autoimmune system, but disease. So hey Nabil, what's up? How you doing? We've got some big brains here. We've got some science people. Yeah, I also want to say we've been on for almost 4 hours now. So if you guys wanted to duck out, I've probably only got about half an hour left in me anyway. But please don't feel like you have to stay on. I don't know what you have planned for your Sundays.
30
but
minutes sounds good for me.
Yeah, that'd be a good place to
Awesome.
call it, I think.
Thank you so much, guys. Like, all of this information, just so you know, like, will be used by very, very sick people now to try and understand. So sorry, back to autoimmunity, because it's so complex. But yeah, autoimmunity and long COVID. Sorry, go on.
Well, I think maybe the last thing that I would touch upon, I guess, is, well, yeah, there's these generation of autoantibodies, and at least based off of some of the research that I've seen, and I think some of the research that you sent, where I think for one of them, it was like through um, through, let's say, filtering out or providing a therapy that, let's say, neutralizes the autoantibodies, there appears to be some sort of improvement that is seen. Where it's like, yeah, they gave this, so like they narrowed it down to like a particular subset of G protein coupled receptors. They gave this therapy that appeared to target or basically neutralize those autoantibodies, and it seems like there was actual improvement. And so that might also hint to the fact that, like, yeah, there might be some sort of autoimmunity induced in some subset of patients with long COVID.
Yeah. I think you guys have what you've both kind of identified that I think is really important for people to understand as well is it's very clear that there are different like types, right? Which is slightly confusing insofar that it muddies the water for these kind of initial studies because they've got to break this down and work it out from coming in blind a little bit. But I do think we're getting somewhere with it.
Yeah,
Um,
I think, as you said, it's muddy, and I think, as far as I can tell, even just doing research on long COVID is almost like inherently muddy.
yeah.
Because if I remember correctly, I think this is like one of the issues with doing research on long COVID. This is not to say that it shouldn't be done. I just more trying to demonstrate some of the challenges
Mhm.
and hurdles involved. Where it's like, yeah, sort of, we want to compare long COVID patients without defining what long COVID is fully yet to presumably healthy controls. But
Yeah.
I think there's a potential issue, and those healthy controls, ideally, don't have never had infection. And I don't think we have really 100% foolproof ways of determining who has never been infected. We have good ways, but I don't think we have sort of like bulletproof ways of like establishing
Mm.
healthy controls. Where it's like we are sometimes including, uh, you know, let's say we're including potentially people that have prior infections in our healthy controls, and that might be like sort of a founding variable, where it's like it's almost like inherently challenging.
Yeah, it's just very difficult because like most people have had it by now, which is really unfortunate.
Mm.
But I mean, there are still people who have not had it,
For
and
sure,
there are ways
absolutely.
to test for it. But like that test is not readily accessible. It requires a full blood draw, and more in-depth testing. I mean, it's likely just an ELISA run by a laboratory, but like you need a testing laboratory to do it. You just can't have like an in-house phlebotomist do it or something like that. Like it's expensive.
Yeah.
Doctors and insurance companies, especially if you're talking America, like they're not going to cover any of that.
Question.
So
So there's something in this literature, and this is where this is slightly confusing, and I wonder if you guys have any thoughts on this. So this is Dr. Schiebenborgen, the most German of all German women. She runs the MECFS like center in Charité which is one of the biggest like hospitals that's also like university hospitals essentially like University College London Hospital, Oxford University Hospital, blah 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 blah. And she's also, as you can imagine, because she's a specialist in post-viral research, at least, is managing the long COVID trials as well. I call her Sheben Bay, which I never thought I would, but I genuinely think she's on to something here. I did with the G-coupled protein receptor idea until a couple of things have come out. So in the history of MECFS, there's only really been a couple of things that have really started to treat patients at a level where there's been literature. Most patients have just been left and treated in appalling ways. That's IVIG. I listened to a talk by the leading specialist in the UK on IVIG who said, she was like, I'm sat in a room with 20 people and who are specialists on IVIG and they all think it works in a different way. So I would say we don't know why it works, but it fits with an autoimmune hypothesis that both short and long-term treatments of IVIG can help with some patients. Somewhere between an estimated like 50 to 70% is what these people said. Fair enough. So
Yeah.
that's one thing.
Well,
IVIG's really hard to get though, right?
I don't know if it's hard. I'm sure there are challenges. Well, first of all, presumably it's prescribed by a doctor, so that would be inherently gate kept. I don't know if like I'm not
Yeah.
sure that I would even want
Oh, I
people to.
think a specialist,
Yeah,
yeah.
I don't think I would want it to be requested on demand, anyways. But
Mm.
and yeah, IVIG used for a variety of things. And like yeah, it's used if I remember correctly. It's used in both in the context of, let's say, those who are kind of like immunosuppressed or have immunodeficiencies,
Mhm.
It's also
Mhm.
used in the context of, let's say, autoimmune, or to like to pretty much like
Yeah.
downregulate the immune system. Because like IVIG, like you are basically put it crudely, you're not actually doing this, but you're basically like injecting, other people's serum into you, and it's just
Mhm.
you are injecting a whole host of things into this person. And so to narrow down exactly what's going on, and I don't think we actually fully know, at least when it
Yeah.
comes to down regulating the immune system. Like we
Mhm.
know for some people, like especially those who are, let's say, immunosuppressed or immunocompromised, like the IVIG is providing, let's say, the extra antibodies that they don't have, which is like getting them from other people. We're basically doing sort of a crude transplant, whatever, one antibody from a healthy person to the other person that needs it, as opposed to when it comes to down regulating for autoimmune conditions. It's like, yeah, we don't. There's some sort of regulatory effect, and I think there's some like mechanisms, but I don't think we fully know exactly what's going on there, because like we're
Mhm.
introducing so much stuff in there about the molecular mechanisms. So like, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, if there are auto antibodies in the system, you're diluting out their effect if you're just introducing more. So
Yeah, I guess. I mean, like I said, this woman who was like, "Yeah, I've spent my entire working career like looking at this," and she was like, "We don't fucking know." But it like they're well into like you said, treating multiple different like issues from immune deficiencies to autoimmune issues.
yeah.
Um,
And at the end of the day,
with it for
like
that reason.
arguably, the at some level, the mechanism doesn't matter. If it helps, it helps. The
Yeah,
mechanism matters to
totally.
hopefully understand it better and hopefully do something better with research. But when it comes to like at the patient level, if it helps, it helps.
And okay, here's an interesting point then. So her theory is that G-coupled protein receptor autoantibodies, at least within their initial series of work in both ME/CFS patients and then later long COVID patients, were much higher and correlated with disease severity. And they did some studies with immunopheresis, and then it worked in the opposite direction, right? Less equals less symptoms. Now, there's two things that she said that makes me think, fuck, this is actually probably not as simple as they're letting on, and it probably requires, and there's not the money, but it probably requires a shit ton more specialists working on it to work out exactly what's going on here. But she says, well, those autoantibodies are found in healthy people anyway. They just work in different ways and we don't know how or why. I saw her mention that in a video and I was like, fuck. I spent like £400 on a test that I didn't need then. But and then the second being she has literally like a week ago, I'll find the paper as well, published a paper where they're doing their emergency like trials and publishing data on biomarkers. They use the G-coupled protein autoantibodies as a biomarker for immunopheresis, where they brought down IgG for ages, and then at the end, I think, infused the small amount of IVIG again, so that those people didn't leave hospital, catch a cold, and die. But with the idea of like bringing the immune system down to as much as possible, and then hoping it resets, right? Of which I think 7 patients experienced improvements to different degrees, mild to almost in remission. None of that correlated with the autoantibodies that they thought it would do. Does that mean that that theory's out the window, or it's just more work in progress?
No, um, yeah, I don't think any one study, depending on how it's done, and it's like the most robust study ever. One study is enough to like miss an entire hypothesis
Mm.
of a disease, unless it's like the most rock solid. Uh, and I don't know, like the sample size or the sample selection of that study. It may just have been like
Well,
bad luck of like, yeah, not enough. As in they may just have happened to choose a patient population that doesn't respond to this particular treatment.
So sorry, to be clear, they responded to the treatment and they used a couple of different metrics of like crying. There's a couple of like patient symptomology surveys that are really comprehensive and capture things like PEM. There was definite improvement on that, but sorry, I didn't explain it very well. What didn't happen is they were testing bloods throughout and it didn't seem to have any relationship with the specific autoantibodies that they were looking at. So in the discussion, they're like, okay, it's probably B cell mediated. There probably is a host of autoantibodies that we can't see and we don't know, or they're working in ways we don't understand.
Yeah, so
Where do researchers go from there with that kind of info?
well, yeah, so there was one study, if I remember correctly, in like the ME/CFS whatever domain, where they used a specific they tried a B cell treatment, and it didn't appear to work all that well. I think this specific treatment.
You mean the rituximab where they did this
Yeah,
confuses the fuck out of me. 2 successful phase 2s, like 60 to 70% efficacy, people in full remission, and then they did a phase 3 and it completely failed. Like terrible, like 20% efficacy. Like literally it was lower than the placebo arm. And
yeah,
I like
that totally
how do you
happens.
explain that shit?
Well, there's multiple ways to explore. Like, obviously, I haven't read all the studies, but there are totally potential valid explanations for that. That might just do with more to do with study design as opposed to the therapy not being effective. It could just be it's just a simple matter of I don't know how they're defining let's say remission and how they define response. That might have changed from one study to the next. I don't actually know. I'm just sort of throwing speculations out there as to why you might see this differential effect. Or also it might for all I know they've also changed dosing or dosing regimen between
They
studies.
did actually. They did change dosing regimen, and that is something that comes up with them. But
Yeah, and the patients included. That's why it's and also just as it doesn't appear to, as in it's in all likelihood, long COVID is this heterogeneous sort of syndrome or condition.
exactly, yeah.
ME/CFS also seems to potentially fall. I'm not an expert, but at least from what I can tell, it might fall in that same category.
I
Of
think you're completely right. Within the small communities I'm in, and we all know this, it's very clear that there are themes of patients who seemingly fit into categories, and we're all trying to piece it together through different bits of data. And frustratingly, it seems to fall on this line exactly what we've been talking about, which is feels like some people have some kind of chronic infection that's smoldering and fucking things up, and they need to sort that out. Or some people have some kind of hyper autoimmune / fucked up immune system issue. And the problem then is that second category, though the treatments for that are inherently very dangerous for what you described as well. Like rituximab, which is what they tried in those phase 2s and the phase 3. I believe it's quite an unpleasant drug, and
probably
potentially not a drug that you want to be taking when this pandemic isn't going to go anywhere for a while, right? It seems every 6 months everyone I work with has COVID. We're all off for a bit and then we come back, and it just feels like apparently this is the norm that we're being forced to live with, which is frustrating.
Well, yeah. On the grim bright side, the more people that get COVID, probably the more people are going to be coming down with long COVID, and then at some point it might be too hard. Or
I'll bring you all down with me, you bastards. No, I don't want anyone else to have to suffer this. I would genuinely be happy if someone could just press a button and get rid of this virus. So I'm looking at you two, right? You can do that, yeah?
If only.
I'm working on it.
Yeah, I would have pressed it a long time ago.
Gosh, I feel like we should wind down soon because we've gone to the moon and back. Someone asked a question as well that It's not related to this theory, but sorry, just to finish off, so that people know who are watching, there are a couple of different actors who are now trialing monoclonal antibodies based on this theory. Monoclonal antibodies that are predominantly used in leukemia, because leukemia is cancer of the blood cells. So off-label and increasingly in trials, those drugs are being used to try and treat autoimmunity into remission. Again, kind of like you said with the stem cells, with the idea being I think the problem with autoimmunity is trying to get it as low as possible without putting someone at real fucking risk, particularly given the context of a pandemic, of leaving your room and getting sepsis and dying quite quickly, which is a genuine risk with these kind of medications. So should only be used in trials, she says, totally ignoring her own advice. But like genuinely, like that's what people are trialing on this basis. And I don't know if it's because these studies are showing that it feels like it's a bit more broad, maybe than just like one. They can be like, oh, it's this one autoantibody or these two autoantibodies. It feels like it's bigger than that. I don't know if I'm being I'm hanging too much on a small study with people, but those people improved, and that's what gets me.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, it's I would say it's much bigger than that. But improvement. So like something underlied that, and that should be cause for more investment and more attention to why that exactly might be. So it's just one of those things where it's going to take time to sort it out. And if we're talking autoimmunity, like different people will make different autoantibodies. I mean, that might help explain why something that's kind of a shotgun one size fits all like IVIG actually helped some people, but if you're like, trying to laser target something like a GPCR autoantibody, that might not necessarily be a good approach, because you might have different autoantibodies for different people. Like just the sheer difference between two people with long COVID can be astronomical, which just makes this such a complicated monster to even begin fighting.
Yeah, it's a doozy, isn't it? And just to bring that full circle, is that so using please try and make this not too crazy science, because I read it and I'm like, what the fuck is the extracellular proteome? But this big study was like, we haven't found any meaningful correlation between autoantibodies and disease, right? Do you guys have any thoughts on that? Does that rule that out? Like, additionally, there's no correlation between number of autoantibody reactivities and double negative B cell populations or day from acute symptom onset. I don't know. This to me tells them, long COVID participants did not exhibit increased autoantibodies to the extracellular proteome. Is the extracellular proteome just a set of
That's just fancy sciencey jargon for proteins outside the cell. That is all.
And that's easier to test, presumably, for when you're putting like blood in a through a lab work and stuff, or
I mean,
yeah,
I mean, the way they did it methodologically is they essentially recreated a large swath of all proteins that exist outside of a cell using yeast. So, I mean, Corey, you probably would understand they used a yeast screening library to gauge cross reactivity for antibodies. But like the larger issue is that like what's outside of a cell is like the first thing the immune system is going to encounter when they like kind of roll up to the scene when there's an infection, to be like, hey, what's going on here? What's all this? So like those are going to be the things that are more predisposed for autoimmune reactions, because that'll be just the thing physically closest to them. They're going to see more of what's outside of a cell than what's inside of a cell. But that doesn't mean that there can't be autoimmunity to what's inside of a cell, the intracellular proteome. There's all sorts of possibilities that are still unexplored. So I wouldn't say they've ruled everything out concretely. It's they did an initial screen, which might not even represent all extracellular proteins in the first place. but there's still so much more work to be done to look for autoimmunity that it's worth doing. Like there's the fact that again some people benefit with IVIG hints at that. So there is a subtype of autoimmune long COVID for sure. I think most people in the space would completely agree.
Yeah, and from my really limited understanding, something so if you have a standard blood test, you'll be tested for anti-nuclear antibodies, right? Which are like these are well known ish. They're easy-ish to test, and they are what would eventually potentially, along with other things, give you like a lupus diagnosis or something. But there's loads of literature where they're like you said, for a start, no patient is the same, which confuses it with this. Like you might have more like internal autoantibodies than the patient next to you, but you might still be suffering essentially what could be the same or a very similar disease that would need the same or a very similar treatment. And that's going to make treating this really fucking hard as well. But so this is the thing. Oh God, it makes my brain really hurt. But they did something with this dude called Panther. Don't know who that is. Which said
That's a computer program.
Okay, they used big tech to find that they're essentially, whilst the total number and magnitude of reactivities were not significantly different across groups, reactivities were notably elevated in a subset of participants with long COVID who displayed reactivities against 6, 7, or 9 different proteins of a family. Although there was no difference in sodium channel reactivity magnitude, binarization of long COVID groups into quantile extremes, I know what that is, but in a very different context, for each analyzed geo process revealed significantly increased incidence of tinnitus and nausea. Oh gosh, and then some other things. I don't know. Is this saying that they found it in a subsect with some symptoms, or like that's an area where I'm like, I don't fully understand that bit. Like, what does that mean?
So what I mean, they're trying to see if there's any correlate between like any reactivity results they had and any symptom, basically, and it doesn't really seem like they found much of anything when they're trying to compare, reactivity subsets with specific symptoms. I think that's just kind of more like a set of descriptive statements about their data rather than like making any claims. And I don't think
I
those
see.
descriptive statements really add up to much because that's kind of like one of the larger thrusts about that part of the paper was that like they didn't really have anything
didn't find much
concrete to
there.
operate on,
Yeah. Okay.
which
Right.
is a
Well,
bit of a bummer.
it is a bit of a bummer. It does to me. It feels like this area is particularly as I will be honest, and I think that the Paxlovid trials are really good, but I don't think that they will have a great effect. I think it's worth doing for anybody who walks out of that, recovered, and therefore that's a model developed for people who have that specific type of long COVID, right? That can be helped by
Right.
that. That's great. I don't think that will be a large selection just for, I could be wrong, like that's why you have to do large scale studies, but the stuff from like the patient groups it's I think I know one person who did really well on it and I'm very happy for them. But this kind of more, like you said, chronically activated immune system, that to me needs to be the focus. And if it's not autoimmune, it's going to be something super similar, right? Where it's probably going to have a very similar, like you said, like if IVIG's working, to follow that, and try and work out. There are a lot of monoclonal antibodies in trial now, actually, in America on that basis, which is very, very good.
Mhm.
Gosh, I think that's about all my brain can do. Thank you guys so much
Thank you.
for
Yeah, of course.
everything. Okay. So, I took Paxlovid and I just slept for 3 days and had no other COVID symptoms. My aunt got it. She needed to be talked down from the ledge because she was so miserable. Oh gosh. I was vaxxed though. I don't know if she was. Fuck, was she okay in the end? Did Paxlovid help her out? Like, yeah, my recent COVID was very nasty, but Paxlovid definitely. For a start, I was testing positive pretty much about 12 hours after taking Paxlovid. I wasn't, So it's hopefully stopping. She's okay now. Good. Right. Everyone go give these beautiful human beings a follow. Thank you so much for helping kind of work through a lot of this stuff. I know that people will listen to it and will take a lot from it. Yeah, I almost don't know how to finish. Are either of you going to stream or?
Oh no, I'm
you?
not streaming. I'm here for the conversation.
Yeah,
Fair,
I've got
fair,
stuff
fair,
to
fair.
do in the lab later today, so I'm just on the work grind.
Oh my gosh. Gosh, you're both PhD students as well. I don't know how you do it, but genuinely, thank you both so much. Yeah, give these guys, you can go throughout chat and find them. I think we're on
Yeah, the hyperlinks in the
shout
title will
out
also
time
take you
out,
to
which
our
is annoying.
channels.
Yeah, there you go. There's Corey's. And I look forward to seeing you both on the other side talking about some interesting science and shouting at some chuds somewhere because both of those things are really fun.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
That
Great. Okay.
that'll be the plan.
Uh,
Thank you for the conversation.
Thank you. Right, we are going to raid into someone. Thank you, guys.
Oh, guess they left. Well, it's been a
Oh,
pleasure.
all right.
Take care.
Yeah.
Be
Have
well.
a good one, Corey.
I'll
Take
be
it
seeing
easy.
you around on the Twitch sphere.
Oh, for sure. Have a good weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.
Peace.
d'offre Prime, les 10 et 11 octobre, seulement pour les membres Prime.